Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Vincent Thorne, and I've been a park ranger for 15 years. People call me Vince. I'm 36 now, and I know every trail in the Hurricane Ridge area like the back of my hand. I've rescued 47 people in my career. That's not me bragging. That's just the number I keep in my head. Every face, every name, every story. I used to think I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Broken bones, hypothermia, people lost for days eating berries and drinking stream water. I'd pull them out, get them warm, and send them home with a story to tell their friends. Simple as that. But that was before October 1963. Before I learned that some things in these woods don't belong in any story you'd want to tell. My wife Sarah died that spring. Cancer took her fast, just 3 months from diagnosis to the end. My daughter Emily was 16 then, and she blamed me for not being home enough during Sarah's last days. She wasn't wrong. I was always up here in the mountains running from what I couldn't fix. Emily was supposed to visit me that October. First time since her mother's funeral. I'd been planning it for weeks, trying to figure out how to be a dad again. How to talk to a girl who looked so much like her mother it made my chest tight every time I saw her. The call came in Tuesday morning. Dr. Margaret Hartwell, some professor from the university, hadn't checked in for 3 days. She was up here studying the old rock carvings the Maka people left behind. Had 2 students with her, Michael Chen and Lisa Morrison, all 3 of them missing. I knew Margaret a little. She'd been coming up here for 2 years, always respectful, always asking permission before she went poking around the sacred sites. The Maka elders liked her. That meant something. I packed my gear like I always did. Kelty pack, Silva compass, emergency bivvy, rope, first aid kit, and my .38 service revolver. The weather was getting weird, thick fog rolling in from the Pacific when it should have been clear October days. The kind of fog that makes you feel like you're walking through cotton. Tommy Clearwater was supposed to meet me at the trailhead. He was Maka, about 28, and he knew these mountains almost as well as I did. His grandmother was one of the tribal elders, and she'd taught him all the old stories. Most of them, I figured, were just ways to keep people from getting lost in dangerous places. When Tommy showed up, he looked nervous. That wasn't like him. Tommy was solid, the kind of guy who could track a deer through a thunderstorm. "You sure about this, Vince?" he asked, checking his pack for the 3rd time. "Course I'm sure. 3 people missing. It's what we do. Grandmother says we shouldn't go up there. Says the shadow that walks between worlds is moving again." I'd heard that story before. Some kind of monster that lived in the spaces between our world and somewhere else. Every tribe had stories like that. Ways to explain things that happened before people understood about avalanches and exposure and getting turned around in the woods. "Your grandmother's a wise woman," I said. "But Margaret's been gone 3 days. Storm's coming in tomorrow night. We go now or we don't go at all." Tommy nodded, but I could see he wasn't happy about it. The trail up to Hurricane Ridge was different that morning. Not wrong exactly, but different. The Douglas firs that had been growing here for hundreds of years looked sick, thick sap bleeding from healthy bark. The sound was wrong too. No birds, no insects, no small animals rustling in the underbrush. Just our boots on the trail and the whisper of fog through the trees. My radio crackled with static. "Base, this is Thorne. Starting up the Ridge Trail now." Static. Nothing but static. "Base, do you copy?" More static, and then something that might have been a voice. Couldn't make out the words. "Radio trouble?" Tommy asked. "Probably the fog. It'll clear up." But I was, already wondering if it would. We found Margaret's camp around noon. It was set up in a clearing about half a mile from the main petroglyph site. 3 tents, a camp kitchen, research equipment laid out on a folding table. Everything neat and organized, like they'd just stepped away for a minute. Except the coffee pot was still warm. "That's not right," I said, touching the metal. This coffee was made this morning. Tommy was walking around the edge of the camp, looking at the ground. Vince, you need to see this. He was crouched next to what looked like footprints in the soft earth. But they were wrong. Human feet, but 18 inches long and deep, pressed into the ground like whatever made them weighed 3 times what it should. Could be a hoax, I said. But even as I said it, I knew better. The prints were too clean, too detailed. I could see the arch, the individual toes, and they were everywhere around the camp. Margaret's notes are still here, Tommy called from the research table. Last entry was yesterday. Says she heard something walking around the camp all night. Something big. I picked up her notebook. Margaret had neat handwriting, the kind teachers use to make you practice. The last entry was dated October 15th, yesterday morning. The sounds continued all night. Footsteps circling the camp, but when Michael went to investigate with the flashlight, nothing there. The local petroglyphs show similar symbols to sites in Alaska and Siberia. Beginning to think the shadow people stories are based on something real. The patterns suggest some kind of interdimensional... The sentence just stopped. Pen still lying on the page. Tommy, help me search the area. Look for any sign of where they went. We spread out from the camp in a spiral pattern. It was basic search and rescue. Cover the ground systematically, look for disturbed vegetation, dropped-in, equipment, anything that might tell us which way they'd gone. I found the first body about 200 yards from camp. Michael Chen was lying face down in a patch of ferns. From a distance, he looked like he might be sleeping. But when I got closer, I saw what was wrong. His spine was twisted. Not broken. Twisted. Like someone had grabbed his shoulders and his hips and turned them in opposite directions. No human being could survive that kind of damage. No human being could do that kind of damage. But there wasn't a mark on him. No cuts, no bruises, no signs of a struggle. Just that impossible twist in his spine and an expression of absolute terror frozen on his face. Jesus, Tommy whispered behind me. What could do that? I checked Michael's pulse, even though I knew he was dead. His skin was cold, but not stiff. Recent. His watch had stopped at 3:33 a.m. We need to find the others, I said. Now! We found Lisa Morrison 20 minutes later. She was 40 feet up in a Douglas fir, wedged between 2 branches like she'd been placed there. No way to climb that tree. Smooth bark, no branches for the first 20 feet. No way to fall into that position either. Like Michael, she had no visible injuries. Like Michael, her watch had stopped at 3:33 a.m. This isn't natural, Tommy said. His voice was shaking. This is what grandmother warned about. The shadow that walks between worlds. People don't just end up in trees, Tommy. There's an explanation. Yeah? What is it? I didn't have an answer. We found Dr. Margaret Hartwell alive. She was sitting by the petroglyph site staring at the rock carvings. When we approached, she didn't respond. Her eyes were wide open, pupils dilated like she was looking at something very bright. But she was in shadow. Margaret, I said. Dr. Hartwell? She turned her head slowly, like she was moving through water. When she spoke, her voice, ice was barely a whisper. Shadow. Walking. Between. Can't look away. Her body temperature was 94 degrees. In October mountain air, that should have killed her, but she was still breathing, still conscious. Just not really there. We need to get her down to the hospital, I said. No. Tommy was backing away from the petroglyph site. We need to get out of here, now, before it gets dark. Before what gets dark? Look at the shadows, Vince. Look at them. I looked. The shadows cast by the trees were wrong. They moved independently of the wind, stretching and contracting like living things. And one of them, a shadow about 9 feet tall, had no tree casting it. It was just standing there, watching us. That's impossible, I said. The shadow moved. Not the jerky motion of a shadow cast by something moving. Smooth, fluid, like it was walking. That's when I started to understand that maybe, just maybe, the old stories weren't just stories. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in 10 seconds. I watched my breath turn to fog as frost formed on the ground around that impossible shadow. Margaret Hartwell started making a sound. Not quite a scream, not quite a moan. Like she was trying to warn us about something her mind couldn't process. "Move," Tommy said. "We have to move now." I grabbed Margaret under the arms and started pulling her away from the petroglyphs. She was heavier than she should have been, like gravity was working differently around her. The shadow, I couldn't call it anything else, followed us. It didn't walk the way shadows should move. It flowed, like water running uphill, and it was getting bigger. "This way," Tommy said, leading us toward a dense stand of firs. "The trees might help." "Help how?" "I don't know. But Grandmother always said to stay under living wood when the shadow people come." We made it maybe 50 yards before the shadow caught up to us. It didn't touch us, didn't need to. The fear that came off it was like a physical thing, pressing against my chest until I could barely breathe. Rhett stopped moaning and went completely silent. I've been scared before. Scared of heights during rescues, scared of weather, scared of telling Emily that her mother was dying. But this was different. This was the kind of fear that made you want to curl up and stop existing. The shadow stopped at the edge of the trees. Not because it couldn't go farther, but because it was choosing not to. Like it was playing with us. "It's toying with us," Tommy whispered. "Shadows don't toy with people." "That's not a shadow, Vince. That's something else wearing a shadow's shape." My radio crackled. Not static this time, but voices, speaking in a language I'd never heard before. Low, rhythmic, like a chant. Margaret's eyes rolled back in her head and she started speaking the same words. "We need to get back to camp," I said. "Get our gear and get out of here." "No, camp's not safe. Nothing's safe." But we had to try. We half-carried Margaret back toward the clearing, keeping to the trees as much as possible. The shadow followed us, always just at the edge of sight. When I looked directly at it, it seemed to fade. When I looked away, it was solid as a person. The camp was destroyed, not torn apart, rearranged. The tents were still standing, but they were inside out. The research equipment was sorted into perfect geometric patterns. Margaret's notebooks were open, but all the pages were blank. "This is impossible," I said. "We were just here." "Time works differently around them," Tommy said. "Grandmother told me. The shadow people exist between seconds. They can change what already happened." I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. The evidence was right in front of me. 2 hours ago, this camp had been normal. Now it looked like something had redesigned it according to rules I didn't understand. That's when we heard the screaming. It was coming from the direction of the petroglyphs. And screaming, but wrong, too high, too sustained, like someone's vocal cords were being stretched. "Stay here with Margaret," I told Tommy. "Don't go toward the sound, Vince. That's what it wants. Someone's in trouble. Someone's bait." But I was already moving. 15 years of search and rescue don't just shut off because the situation is impossible. Someone was screaming, and that meant someone needed help. I made it about 100 yards before I realized the screaming was coming from above me. I looked up and saw Tommy. Tommy was hanging in the air 20 feet up, suspended by nothing I could see. His mouth was open, that impossible scream coming out of him. But his eyes were calm, looking right at me, trying to tell me something. "Tommy!" I reached for my climbing rope, but there was nothing to anchor it to. No way to get up there, no way to help him. The screaming stopped. Tommy fell. I caught him, but he was already dead. His body was wrong. Not twisted like Michael's, but drained. His skin was gray, his hair white. He looked like he'd aged 50 years in 50 seconds. But the worst part was his eyes. They were still alive, still aware, still trying to tell me something. like part of him was still trapped up there in whatever had grabbed him. That's when I saw the shadow again. It was bigger now, more solid, 9 feet tall and roughly human-shaped, but wrong in ways that made my brain hurt to look at. It had eyes, amber-colored, like an animal's eyes in firelight. And it was walking toward me. I ran. 15 years of mountain experience, and I ran like a tourist who'd never seen a trail before. Crashed through underbrush, tripped over roots, made enough noise to wake the dead. But I ran. Behind me, I could hear it following. Not footsteps. Something else. Like the sound of space being torn open. I made it back to where Margaret was sitting. She was exactly where I'd left her, but now she was smiling. "It's beautiful," she said in that whispery voice. "The place between. So beautiful. We have to go, Margaret. Now. Can't leave. Can't even. Our leave. It won't let us." She was right. The shadow was already there, surrounding us. Not just one shadow now, dozens of them, all sizes, all moving independently of any light source. The temperature was dropping fast, and the air itself seemed to be getting thicker. That's when I remembered something Tommy's grandmother had told me once, about fire that burns shadow. I reached for my emergency flare gun. The flare gun was in my pack, along with 6 flares. Standard emergency equipment, meant for signaling rescue helicopters, not fighting monsters that shouldn't exist. But Tommy's grandmother had talked about fire that burns shadow, and it was the only fire I had. I loaded the first flare and pointed it at the nearest shadow. "Stay back." The shadow paused. Not afraid exactly, but cautious, like it was evaluating a new threat. "It sees the fire," Margaret whispered. "Doesn't like the fire." I pulled the trigger. The flare hit the shadow dead center and exploded in a burst of red light. The shadow didn't just retreat. It screamed. A sound like metal being torn apart, like wind through a cave, like every nightmare you've ever had all at once. The other shadows pulled back, forming a circle around us, waiting. "How many flares you got?" Margaret asked. She was more alert now, like the light had broken through whatever was controlling her. "5 more." "Not enough. There's too many of them." She was right. I counted at least 20 shadows, maybe more. They were getting bolder, testing the edges of the flare's light. When the flare burned out, they'd move in. "The petroglyphs," Margaret said. "We need to get to the petroglyphs." That's where this started. That's where it can end. The rock carvings aren't just art, they're a map of how to close the spaces between worlds. The first flare was starting to fade. I loaded another one and fired it straight up, creating a temporary umbrella of light. The shadows hissed and pulled back. "Move," I said. We ran toward the petroglyph site. The shadows followed, staying just outside the light. I could feel them pressing against the edges of the flare's glow, testing for weaknesses. The petroglyphs were carved into a granite outcropping about 12 feet high, ancient symbols that looked like stick figures but more complex. Some of them seemed to move in the flickering light, like they were trying to tell a story. "There," Margaret said, pointing to a cluster of symbols near the base of the rock. "Those marks, they're not random, they're instructions." "Instructions for what?" "How to send them back." The second flare was dying. I loaded a third and fired it at the ground between us and the shadows. The light created a temporary barrier, but I could see it wouldn't last long. What do the instructions say? The shadow people come through weak places in reality, places where our world touches theirs. The fire ceremony seals the breach, but it requires a sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice? Margaret looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. Someone has to stay behind. Someone has to hold the door closed from this side. I had 3 flares left. The shadows were getting more aggressive, testing the light, finding the dark spaces between the photons. Soon they'd realize the flares wouldn't last forever. "There's another way," I said. "Has to be. Look at the symbols, Vince. Really look." I looked. In the dancing light of the flare, the petroglyphs seemed to come alive. I could see the story they were telling. Stick figures, fighting shadow figures, fire pushing back darkness. One figure standing alone while others escaped. The same story, over and over. Someone always stayed behind. "No," I said. "I'm not leaving you here." "You have a daughter," Margaret said. "I have nobody. This is my research, my responsibility." The third flare was almost gone. I loaded the fourth and held it ready. "Tommy's grandmother taught him protection rituals," I said. "Maybe if we were..." "Tommy's dead, Vince. The rituals died with him." She was right. But I still had 2 flares left, and I still had a brain that had gotten 47 people off this mountain alive. "The symbols," I said, "they're not just instructions. They're a warning. They're telling us where the breach is." I looked around the clearing. The shadows were thickest near a cluster of trees about 30 yards away. The air there seemed to shimmer, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt. "That's where they're coming from," I said. "The space between worlds." Tommy was right. It's not just a story. I fired the 4th flare at the shimmering air. The light passed through it and kept going, but for just a moment I could see what was on the other side. Another forest. Similar to ours, but wrong. The trees were too tall, the sky was too dark, and things moved between the trunks that had too many arms and not enough faces. "My God," Margaret whispered. "It's real. It's all real." The shadows were moving in. I had 1 flare left, and when it was gone, we were gone too. That's when I heard Emily's voice. Dad, where are you?" She was supposed to be at home 300 miles away, but I could hear her calling my name somewhere in the darkness beyond the shadows. "It's not her," Margaret said. "It's them. They're using her voice." But what if it wasn't? What if Emily had come up here looking for me? What if she was lost in the woods with these things? I loaded the last flare. "Don't," Margaret said. "It's a trap." "What if it's not?" I fired the flare toward Emily's voice. The light revealed nothing but trees and shadows. But Emily's voice was still calling, fainter now, moving away. "Dad, please, I'm scared." The flare was the only thing keeping the shadows back. In 30 seconds, it would burn out. In 30 seconds, Margaret and I would be dead, and Emily would be alone in the fuss. A woods with things that shouldn't exist. I made my choice. I ran toward Emily's voice, leaving Margaret alone with the dying light. I found Emily 50 yards from the petroglyph site, standing in a circle of moonlight that shouldn't have been there. The fog had cleared completely, and the stars were out. But it was still the middle of the day. "Dad?" she said, turning toward me. "I've been looking for you." She looked exactly like her mother. Same brown hair, same green eyes, same way of tilting her head when she was confused. But she was wrong somehow. Too perfect, like someone had made her from a photograph. "Emily, what are you doing here?" "I came to find you. Mom told me you needed help." "Emily, your mother's dead." "I know," she said, and smiled. "So am I." That's when I realized I was looking at another shadow. This one had just learned to wear a human face. Behind me, I heard Margaret scream. The last flare had burned out. I turned and ran back toward the petroglyphs. The shadows were closing in on Margaret, but they moved slowly, like they were savoring the moment. She was on her knees, staring up at the rock carvings, speaking in that same unknown language I'd heard on the radio. "The fire ceremony," she said when she saw me. "It's not about the flares. It's about the sacrifice. Someone has to burn to seal the breach." "Nobody's burning," I said. "Look at the symbols, Vince. Look at what they're really showing." I looked. The petroglyphs were glowing now, faint but definitely glowing. The stick figures in the carvings were moving, acting out the same scene over and over. Fire pushing back shadow, one figure standing alone while others fled. But I was seeing it wrong. The figure wasn't staying behind to fight. It was becoming the fire. "It's not a sacrifice," I said. "It's a transformation. Someone has to become the guardian. Someone has to watch the door." The shadows were almost on us. I could feel the cold coming off them, the wrongness that made reality bend around their edges. In a few seconds, they'd be close enough to touch us. "I'll do it," I said. "No, you have Emily. You have reasons to live." "Emily's dead too. They showed me. That thing wearing her face, it's not her." Margaret grabbed my hand. "Then we do it together." I don't know what happened next. Not exactly. I remember pain, like every cell in my body was being rewritten. I remember light, brighter than the sun, burning away the shadows and sealing the breach between worlds. I remember Margaret's hand in mine and the sound of reality closing like a door. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. 3 days had passed. My hair had turned white, and I couldn't stop shaking. The doctors said I was suffering from exposure and trauma, but they couldn't explain why I kept talking about shadows that walked between worlds. The official report said it was a hiking accident, severe weather conditions, 3 people dead, 1 survivor found in a state of shock. Dr. Margaret Hartwell was listed as one of the fatalities, but they never found her body. They never found a lot of things. The petroglyph site was mysteriously closed to the public for preservation purposes. Other rangers started reporting equipment failures and temperature drops in the same area, but nobody wanted to investigate too closely. I was transferred to a desk job. Couldn't handle the mountain rescues anymore. Too many shadows that moved wrong, too many sounds that didn't belong. Emily never came to visit. She said I scared her, and I couldn't blame her. But sometimes, late at night, I can still feel Margaret's hand in mine. And sometimes, when the shadows are deep and the world is quiet, I can hear her voice telling me the door is still closed. The Mucka elders accepted me as a witness. They taught me the protection rituals Tommy never got to finish. They gave me sage and tobacco and words of power that worked better than flare guns. I carry a flare gun anyway. Just in Sioux, the ace. Because the thing about shadows is this: they're always there, waiting for the light to fade. And some shadows aren't cast by anything in our world. When you see one walking independently, when you feel that cold that doesn't belong, when reality starts to bend around the edges, run. Run fast, run far, and don't look back. Unless you're the one standing guard. Unless you're the one keeping the door closed. Unless you're me. My name is Vincent Thorne, and I've been watching the shadows for 60 years. Some days they're quiet. Some days they test the boundaries. But the door stays closed. Margaret and I made sure of that. The door stays closed. My name is Frank Ironwood, and I've been a park ranger for 19 years. I've seen things in the wilderness that would make most people pack up and move to the city. But what happened in the winter of 1978 was different. It was the kind of different that makes you question everything you thought you knew about the world. I work the northern boundary of Algonquin Provincial Park, right where Ontario touches the American border. It's rough country up there, the kind of place where you can walk for days without seeing another human soul. Most folks think that sounds lonely, but I've always preferred the company of trees and wildlife to people. Trees don't lie to you. Animals don't pretend to be something they're not. Maybe it's because I'm half Ojibwe. My grandfather taught me the old ways before he died, how to read the signs in nature, how to survive when everything goes wrong. He also told me stories that my mother said were just fairy tales, stories about things that lived in the deep woods, things that got hungry when the snow fell heavy and the nights stretched long. I thought they were just stories, too, until that winter. The whole thing started on a Tuesday in February. I was sitting in my cabin, nursing a cup of coffee and trying not to think about the bottle of whiskey in my desk drawer. The drinking had gotten worse since I came back from Vietnam, but the job helped keep my head straight. Out here, surrounded by nothing but trees and snow, the nightmares seemed smaller. The radio crackled to life around 8 in the morning. "Frank, you there?" It was Sarah from dispatch, her voice tight with worry. "I'm here, Sarah. What's the problem?" "We've got a family that's 3 days overdue. The Kowalskis, Robert, Sandra, and their twin boys. They were supposed to check in yesterday." I set down my coffee. 3 days overdue in February meant trouble. Real trouble. Well, where were they headed? Backcountry camping. Their permit says they were going to set up near Frost Lake. Frost Lake. Even the name should have been a warning. It's about 40 miles northeast of my station, accessible only by snowmobile in winter. The kind of place where you can disappear without a trace if you're not careful. Weather's been bad out there, I said, though that was putting it mildly. The past week had brought the worst blizzard in 50 years. Temperatures had dropped to 40 below, and the wind was howling like something alive and angry. Could be they're just hunkered down, waiting for it to pass. Maybe, Sarah said, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. But the father, Robert, he's supposed to be pretty experienced. Military background. He wouldn't have missed a check-in unless something was really wrong. She was right. In my experience, the wilderness had two kinds of people, those who respected it and those who didn't. The ones who didn't respect it usually didn't make it past their first serious trip. If Robert Kowalski had been camping in February with his family, he knew what he was doing. I'll head out and take a look, I said. Get Dale on the radio. I'll need backup for this one. Dale McKinnon was my partner, a tough Scottish Canadian who knew the backcountry almost as well as I did. He'd been working wilderness rescue for 10 years, and I'd never seen him panic, no matter how bad things got. While I waited for Dale to show up, I packed my gear. Emergency supplies, first aid kit, extra gasoline for the snowmobile. I also grabbed something else, a small leather pouch that had belonged to my grandfather. Inside were some old items: tobacco, sage, a piece of flint. Traditional stuff that my mother always said was superstitious nonsense. But my grandfather's voice echoed in my head as I tucked the pouch into my jacket. The old things remember, Frank. When the new world fails you, the old ways will keep you alive. I didn't know it then, but those words would save my life. Dale arrived just as the sun was reaching its highest point, though you could barely tell through the thick gray clouds. He pulled up on his snowmobile, his face red from the cold wind. "Hell of a day for a rescue," he said, pulling off his helmet. "Heard on the radio that it's supposed to get worse tonight." "It's always something," I replied. "You ready for this?" Dale nodded, checking his equipment one more time. "Born ready?" Though I got to say, I don't like the idea of a family with kids being out there this long. Kids don't handle the cold like adults do. We started our snowmobiles and headed north. The trail was barely visible under the fresh snow, but I'd been running these routes for so long I could probably find my way blindfolded. The wind was picking up, and I could feel that particular kind of cold that gets into your bones and stays there. About an hour into the ride, something felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but the forest seemed too quiet. Even in winter, there should be some sounds: birds, small animals, the settling of snow-laden branches. Instead, there was nothing but the drone of our engines and the howling wind. I also noticed something else. The animals were moving. Not just moving, fleeing. We passed several deer heading south, their eyes wide with panic. A family of foxes crossed our path, not even bothering to avoid us. In all my years in the woods, I'd never seen animals act like that. Something was driving them away. We reached the area around Frost Lake just as the afternoon light was starting to fade. The snow was coming down harder now, big flakes that stuck to everything and made it hard to see more than 20 feet ahead. Dale killed his engine and pointed toward a cluster of pine trees near the shore. "There," he said. "That's got to be their camp." He was right. Through the swirling snow, I could make out the bright orange of a tent, but something was wrong with it. The fabric was flapping in the wind, and there was a dark stain spreading across the snow around it. We approached slowly, our boots crunching in the deep snow. The temperature seemed to drop with every step we took. By the time we reached the campsite, my breath was coming out in thick clouds that froze almost instantly. The tent was shredded, not torn by wind or worn by weather, shredded. Long, jagged rips ran from top to bottom, and the fabric hung in strips like ribbons. Inside, I could see sleeping bags soaked with something dark that had frozen solid. "Jesus," Dale whispered. "What the hell happened here?" I knelt down next to the tent, trying to read the story in the snow. There were signs of a struggle: scattered camping gear, a overturned camp stove, food containers thrown around. But there was something else, something that made my blood run cold. Footprints. Human footprints. But they were wrong. "Dale, come look at this," I called. He crouched down beside me, studying the prints I was pointing at. They were definitely human-shaped, but they were huge, at least 15 inches long, and the stride between them was impossibly wide, like someone had been taking 8-foot steps. "That's not possible," Dale said. "No human being has feet that big." I stood up, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. My grandfather's stories were suddenly echoing in my head. Tales of things that walked on 2 legs but weren't human, things that got hungry in the deep winter. "We need to follow the trail," I said. "See where it leads." Dale nodded, but I could see the worry in his eyes. We both knew that whatever had made these tracks wasn't natural. The trail led away from the campsite, deeper into the forest. The footprints were clear in the snow, accompanied by drag marks that looked like someone or something had been pulling heavy objects. Every few hundred yards, we found pieces of camping gear scattered in the snow. A child's mitten, a torn piece of jacket, a camping cup with bite marks around the rim. The temperature kept dropping as we followed the trail. Our snowmobiles had started acting up about a mile back, the engines sputtering and dying every few minutes. Now we were on foot, and the cold was so intense it felt like it was burning my lungs. "Frank," Dale said, his voice tight, "you ever see anything like this before?" I was about to answer when we heard it, a sound that made us both freeze in place. It was a voice, distant and thin, calling through the wind. But it wasn't speaking English. It wasn't speaking any language I recognized, though something about it seemed familiar. "Did you hear that?" Dale asked. I nodded, straining to listen. The voice came again, closer this time. It sounded like a child crying, but the words were wrong. They were old words, words that belonged to stories told around fires in the deep woods. "We need to keep moving," I said, though every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around and run. The trail led us to a small clearing where the snow had been disturbed in a perfect circle. In the center of the circle, tied to a large pine tree, was a man's body. Robert Kowalski. Had to be. He was frozen solid, his skin blue-white like ice. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what had been done to him. His chest had been torn open. Not cut, torn, like something with claws had reached inside and pulled out his ribs. His heart was missing, and his fingernails were gone, leaving bloody stumps that had frozen solid. Dale turned away and threw up in the snow. I didn't blame him. I'd seen combat in Vietnam, seen men die in ways that haunt your dreams. But this was different. This was something that enjoyed what it was doing. "What kind of animal?" Dale started to say, but his voice trailed off. "No animal," I said quietly. "Animals kill to eat or to protect themselves. This is something else." I knelt down next to the body, trying to read the signs. Robert Kowalski had been a big man, probably over 6 feet tall and well-built. Whatever had done this to him had been strong enough to overpower him completely. And the way he was positioned, tied to the tree with his arms spread wide, looked almost ceremonial. That's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The body was completely frozen, had been for days. But the blood that had pooled around the base of the tree was still red. Fresh blood doesn't stay red when it freezes. It turns black, then brown. This blood looked like it had been spilled minutes ago. "Dale," I said, backing away from the body. "We need to get out of here. Now." But Dale wasn't listening. He was staring past me, into the trees on the far side of the clearing. His face had gone completely white. "Frank," he whispered, "there's something moving out there." I turned to look where he was pointing. At first, I didn't see anything, just trees and snow and the growing darkness. But then I caught a glimpse of movement between the trunks, something tall and thin, moving with an unnatural gait. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees in the space of a heartbeat. The wind stopped blowing. Even the snow seemed to hang suspended in the air. And then I heard it, a sound that I'll never forget as long as I live. It was like the wind whistling through bare branches, but it formed words, old words, words that my grandfather had taught me, but made me promise never to speak. Wendigo. The thing in the trees was calling itself by name. We ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. When you see something that shouldn't exist, something that violates every natural law you know, running is the only sane response. We crashed through the underbrush, our snowshoes making it hard to move quickly. Behind us, I could hear something crashing through the trees, something big, something through. At didn't care about staying quiet. "The snowmobiles!" Dale shouted over the wind. "We need to get to the snowmobiles!" But when we reached the spot where we'd left them, the machines were passina, dead. Not just out of gas, completely dead. The engines were frozen solid, ice crystals covering every surface. It was like they'd been sitting there for weeks instead of an hour. "This isn't possible," Dale said, frantically trying to start his machine. "It was running fine when we got here." I grabbed his arm. "Leave it. We need to find shelter." The wind was picking up again, and the snow was falling so hard I could barely see 5 feet ahead. The temperature was dropping fast, too fast. In normal weather, it might take hours for the temperature to drop 20 degrees. This had happened in minutes. We stumbled through the forest, looking for any kind of shelter. My hands were starting to go numb despite my thick gloves, and I could see ice crystals forming in Dale's beard. If we didn't find somewhere to get warm soon, we were going to freeze to death. That's when we heard the crying. It was coming from somewhere ahead of us, the sound of children sobbing, but there was something wrong with it. The voices were too synchronized, like they were crying in harmony. "The boys," Dale said. "The Kowalski twins. They might still be alive." Against every instinct I had, we followed the sound. It led us to a small cave in a rocky outcropping, barely visible under the snow. The crying was coming from inside. Dale called out, "Hello? Is someone in there? We're here to help." The crying stopped immediately. Then, after a moment, 2 small voices answered in perfect unison. "Help us. We're so cold." We crawled into the cave, and what we found there nearly broke my heart. 2 boys, maybe 8 years old, huddled together in the back of the cave. They were identical twins with dark hair and blue eyes. They were wearing winter clothes, but they were soaked through and shivering. "It's okay," Dale said, moving toward them. "We're park rangers. We're here to take you home." But as he got closer, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The boys weren't shivering from cold, they were shivering from something else. And their eyes weren't quite right. The pupils were too large, almost white. "Where are your parents?" I asked gently. "The hungry grandfather took them," one of the boys said. Or maybe it was both of them. Their voices blended together so perfectly I couldn't tell. "Hungry grandfather?" Dale looked at me with confusion. I knew what they meant. In the old stories, the Wendigo was sometimes called the hungry grandfather, the ancient one who devoured everything in its path. But how could these children know that? "We're so cold," the boys said again, still speaking in unison. "So hungry." Dale was already pulling emergency blankets from his pack. "Here, let me help you warm up." But when he touched the first boy, he jerked his hand back with a gasp. "Jesus, they're freezing. I mean really freezing. Their skin is like ice." I knelt down next to the boys, trying to get a better look at them. Their skin was pale blue, and when they breathed, no vapor came out. In this cold, everyone's breath should be visible. But these children weren't breathing out any warmth at all. "How long have you been here?" I asked. "Since the hungry grandfather came," they answered together. "He told us to wait. He said he'd be back for us." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. "When did he say he'd be back?" The boys smiled identical smiles, and I saw that their teeth were too sharp, too white. "Soon," they said. "Very soon." Dale was wrapping them in the emergency blankets, but I could see it wasn't helping. If anything, the boys seemed to be getting colder, not warmer. Ice crystals were forming on the blankets where they touched the children's skin. "We need to get them out of here," Dale said. "Get them to a hospital." But even as he said it, I could see the doubt in his eyes. These children weren't normal. Whatever had happened to them, whatever the thing in the woods had done, it had changed them into something else. "Dale," I said quietly, "check their pulse." He pressed his fingers against the first boy's wrist, then the second. His face went white. I can't feel anything." The boys looked at us with those strange, pale eyes. "Don't worry," they said in their perfect unison. "The hungry grandfather will take care of everything. He's so close now." That's when we heard it. The sound of something moving through the forest outside the cave. Something big. Something that was deliberately trying to be quiet. The footsteps were spaced far apart, just like the tracks we'd found at the campsite. Dale grabbed his rifle from his pack. "Whatever's out there, it's not getting these kids." But I was looking at the boys, and I was beginning to understand. The pale eyes, the synchronized speech, the impossible cold of their skin. These weren't the Kowalski twins anymore. They were something else, something that was waiting for us to get close enough. "Dale," I said urgently, "we need to leave. Now." "I'm not leaving these children," he said firmly. The boys smiled again, and this time I could see that their teeth were definitely too sharp. "Thank you," they said together. "We're so hungry." The footsteps outside were getting closer, and inside the cave, the temperature was dropping so fast that ice was forming on the walls. Our breath was coming out in thick clouds, and I could feel the cold seeping into my bones. "The hungry grandfather is here," the boys said, their voices now carrying an echo that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "He wants to meet you." Dale raised his rifle, pointing it toward the cave entrance. But I knew it wouldn't matter. You can't shoot something that's already dead. You can't kill something that was never alive to begin with. The footsteps stopped right outside the cave, and then, in a voice like winter wind through dead trees, something spoke. "Come out, little ones. Come out and play." The Wendigo stepped into the cave entrance, and I finally saw it clearly. It was tall, at least 12 feet, but so thin it looked like it was starving. Its skin was pale blue-white, stretched tight over bones that seemed too long for any human body. Its hands ended in claws that were easily 6 inches long, stained dark with dried blood. But it was the face that nearly broke my mind. It had once been human. You could still see traces of what it used to be, the basic shape of a nose, the hollow where eyes should be. But now those eye sockets held something like frozen lakes, blue-white and empty of any warmth. Its mouth was too wide, filled with yellowed teeth that were sharp as needles. When it smiled, I could see all the way down its throat to something that glowed with cold fire. "Hello, little ranger," it said in that voice like wind through bones. "I've been waiting for you." Dale fired his rifle. The bullet hit the thing's center mass, and I heard the impact. But it didn't even flinch. The wound sealed itself instantly, like the creature was made of ice that could freeze itself back together. "Iron and lead," the Wendigo said, almost laughing. "Such modern solutions to ancient problems." The temperature in the cave had dropped so fast that frost was forming on our clothes. I could feel my fingers going numb, and my breath was coming out in clouds so thick I could barely see. "The children," Dale said, his voice shaking from cold and fear. "Let them go." "Children?" The Wendigo tilted its head, and I heard vertebrae cracking like ice. "These are not children anymore. Show him, little ones." The boys stood up, letting the emergency blankets fall away. Their skin was no longer pale blue. It was white as fresh snow. And their eyes were the same frozen lakes as the Wendigo's. "We're so hungry," they said together. But now their voices carried the same echo as the creatures. "We've been waiting so long to eat." That's when I understood. The Wendigo didn't just kill people. It changed them, made them into something like itself. The real Kowalski twins were gone, replaced by these things that wore their faces. "You cannot run," the Wendigo said, taking a step closer. "You cannot hide. The winter is mine, and the winter is everywhere." I could feel the cold seeping into my bones, slowing my movements. My hands were so numb I could barely feel the rifle in my grip. Dale was in worse shape. His lips were turning blue, and ice was forming in his beard. But then I remembered something. My grandfather's voice from long ago. The old things remember, Frank. When the new world fails you, the old ways will keep you alive. The leather pouch, the one with the traditional items inside. With fingers that could barely move, I reached into my jacket and pulled out the pouch. Inside was the piece of flint, the tobacco, and a small bundle of sage. My grandfather had taught me the old prayers, the ones that honored the spirits of the forest. The Wendigo saw what I was doing and hissed, a sound like steam escaping from a kettle. "Ancient words will not save you, little ranger. I am older than your grandfather's grandfather." "Maybe," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "but my grandfather knew how to deal with things like you." I struck the flint against the cave wall, creating sparks. The sage caught fire easily, filling the cave with sweet-smelling smoke. The Wendigo stepped back, its frozen eyes narrowing. "Fire," it said, and for the first time I heard something like fear in its voice. Sacred fire. The temperature in the cave stopped dropping. The children things hissed and moved away from the smoke. I continued the prayer my grandfather had taught me, speaking the old words in Ojibwe. "Dale," I said without taking my eyes off the Wendigo, "do you have any emergency flares?" "In my pack," he said, his voice barely a whisper from the cold. "Light 1. Now." Dale fumbled in his pack and pulled out a road flare. When he struck it, the cave filled with bright red light. The Wendigo shrieked, a sound like breaking glass, and stumbled backward. But I knew the flare wouldn't last long. We needed to get out of the cave, and we needed to finish this. "Follow me," I said to Dale. "Son, stay close to the light." We moved toward the cave entrance, the flare held high. The Wendigo backed away, but I could see it was already adapting, its frozen eyes adjusting to the light. We had minutes at most. Outside, the blizzard was worse than ever. The wind was howling like a living thing, and the snow was falling so hard it was like walking through a white curtain. But I knew where we needed to go. "The lake!" I shouted over the wind. "We need to get to the lake." "Why?" Dale called back. "Running water," I said. "The old stories say they can't cross running water." But as we stumbled through the forest, I realized the lake would be frozen solid. There was no running water anywhere. We were trapped in a world of ice and snow, and the Wendigo was right behind us. The creature moved through the forest like it owned it, gliding between trees without making a sound. Every few seconds I would catch a glimpse of it in the flare's light, always closer, always watching. "It's playing with us," Dale said, his breath coming in short gasps. "It could catch us any time it wants." He was right. The Wendigo was hurting us, driving us toward something. But what? We reached the shore of Frost Lake just as the flare was starting to die. The ice stretched out in front of us, black and smooth as glass. There was nowhere left to run. "End of the line," the Wendigo said, stepping out of the trees behind us. I do so enjoy a good hunt. The children things appeared on either side of it, their pale eyes glowing in the dying light of the flare. They were still smiling those terrible smiles. "Time to eat," they said in unison. But then I had an idea. A crazy, desperate idea that probably wouldn't work. But it was all I had. I pulled out the last of the tobacco from my grandfather's pouch and threw it onto the dying flare. The sacred smoke rose up into the night air, and I began to pray. Not just the words my grandfather had taught me, but everything I could remember from the old stories. The Wendigo stopped moving. For the first time, it looked uncertain. "You think your grandfather's magic is stronger than winter itself?" it asked. "No," I said, "but I think it's stronger than you." I grabbed Dale's arm and pulled him toward the lake. "We're going onto the ice." "That's suicide," he said. "The ice won't hold us." "It'll hold us longer than it'll hold him," I said, hoping I was right. We stepped onto the frozen lake. The ice was thick, maybe 6 inches deep. It groaned under our weight, but held firm. Behind us, the Wendigo was following, its massive form moving across the ice with impossible grace. But I was counting on something. In the old stories, creatures like the Wendigo were tied to the land, to the solid earth. Water was different. Water was change, movement, life, even frozen water. When we reached the center of the lake, I stopped. The Wendigo was only 20 feet away now, close enough that I could see my reflection in its frozen eyes. "Enough games," it said. "Time to feed." It took a step forward, and I heard something I'd been hoping for. A crack. The ice was thick, but it wasn't thick enough to support something that weighed as much as the Wendigo. "The old ways," I said, pulling out the last item from my grandfather's pouch, a small piece of sacred copper. Fire and water. Life and death. I threw the copper onto the ice and spoke the final words of the prayer. The metal began to glow, not with heat, but with something older, something that came from the earth itself. The ice cracked. Then it shattered. The Wendigo fell through in an explosion of freezing water and steam. Its scream, echo, echoed across the lake as it sank into the dark water below. The children things ran to the edge of the hole, but they couldn't follow. They stood there, crying in their perfect unison as the water closed over their master. Then, as quickly as it had started, everything went quiet. The wind stopped howling, the snow stopped falling, the temperature began to rise. Dale and I stood on the ice, shaking from cold and fear, watching the hole in the lake freeze over. Within minutes, it was as if nothing had happened. The lake was smooth and black once again. "Is it over?" Dale asked. I looked at the spot where the Wendigo had disappeared. The ice was already thick again, but I could see something moving underneath, a shadow that paced back and forth like a caged animal. "For now," I said, "but it's still down there, still waiting." They found us 4 days later, nearly frozen to death on the shore of Frost Lake. The official report said we'd suffered severe exposure due to equipment failure during a rescue operation. The Kowalski family was listed as missing, presumed dead due to extreme weather conditions. Dale spent 2 weeks in the hospital with frostbite and hypothermia. When he got out, he put in for a transfer to a station down south. He never talked about what happened at the lake, and I never asked him to. Some things are better left unspoken. I went back to work after a week, but everything was different. I couldn't sleep without dreaming about frozen eyes and voices that spoke in unison. I couldn't stand the cold. Even a cool autumn day would send me into shaking fits. The drinking got worse. The department transferred me to a station in southern Ontario, where the winters were milder and the forests were smaller. They said it was for my own good, that I needed time to recover from the trauma. They were right, but not in the way they thought. I still carry my grandfather's pouch with me everywhere I go. I've refilled it with new tobacco, new sage, new flint, because I know the Wendigo is still out there, still waiting under the ice of Frost Lake, and I know it's not the only one. The Ojibwe elders came to see me about a month after the incident. They didn't ask many questions, but they performed a cleansing ceremony and taught me new prayers, stronger ones. They also told me something that keeps me awake at night. "The hungry ones are waking up," old Joseph Crowfeather said as he burned sage in my living room. "The world grows cold again and they grow strong. You have seen one, but there are others. They sleep in the deep places, in the forgotten places, but they dream of hunger, and their dreams are becoming real." I asked him what I was supposed to do about it. "Watch," he said. "Listen. When the signs come, you will know. The old knowledge lives in you now. Use it." So I watch. I listen. I read the reports that come in from other rangers, other stations, equipment failures in extreme cold, missing persons with no logical explanation, animals fleeing south when they should be settling in for winter. Last week I got a call from a station up north. They'd found a campsite torn apart, with footprints in the snow that were too big to be human. The local rangers were calling it a bear attack, but I know better. I'm driving up there tomorrow. I've got my grandfather's pouch, a box of road flares, and a thermos of coffee to keep me warm. I've also got something new, a small copper amulet that Joseph Crowfeather gave me, inscribed with symbols that hurt to look at directly. The hungry ones are patient, he told me when he gave it to me. They can wait decades, centuries for the right moment, but they are not invincible. Fire and water, earth and air, the old elements still have power. Remember that. I remember. I remember everything. The sound of the Wendigo's voice, the feeling of ice forming in my lungs, the sight of those children with their frozen eyes. I remember it all, and I carry it with me like a warning. Sighing. Because winter is coming again. It always does. And in the deep cold, in the places where the old forests remember what came before, hungry things are stirring. They smell the fear of modern people who have forgotten the old ways, who think their technology can protect them from everything. They're wrong. When the snow falls heavy and the nights stretch long, when the wind howls like something alive and the temperature drops below what should be possible, the hungry ones walk. They hunt. They feed. But they can be stopped. The old knowledge still works, if you know how to use it. Fire and water, sacred smoke and copper blessed by the spirits of the earth. These things still have power, even in our modern world. My name is Frank Ironwood, and I'm a guardian now. Not just of the forest, but of the knowledge that keeps the hungry ones at bay. I've seen what happens when they wake up, when they decide to hunt. And I've made a promise to my grandfather's spirit, to the Ojibwe elders, and to myself. Never again. Not on my watch. The Wendigo is still down there, under the ice of Frost Lake. Sometimes, on very quiet nights, I can hear it calling. Not with words, but with hunger itself. A sound that reaches across the miles and whispers promises of long winter nights and endless cold. But I'm not afraid anymore. I have the old knowledge now. I know the prayers, the rituals, the ways to fight back. And I know that somewhere out there, other people are learning too. The elders are teaching again, passing on the stories that were almost forgotten. The hungry ones are waking up. But so are we. Winter is coming. Let it come. We'll be ready. My name is Catherine Rivers, but everyone calls me Cat. I'm 29 years old, and I've been a forest ranger for 6 years now. I was the first woman to get this job in the Mark Twain National Forest District in Missouri, and let me tell you, that wasn't easy. Most folks around here thought a woman couldn't handle the job. They said I was too small, too weak, too emotional. But I proved them wrong. I know every deer trail in these woods. I can track a wounded animal for miles. I've dealt with 23 dangerous animals in my time here. Bears, wild boars, even a mountain lion once. I carry a notebook everywhere, writing down everything I see. Details matter in this job. The year was 1984, and things were different back then. We didn't have cell phones or fancy GPS, just CB radios that worked when they felt like it, and our own skills to keep us alive. When you're out there alone, you better know what you're doing. I needed this job badly. My mom was sick with cancer, and the treatments cost more money than we had. Being a ranger paid well, but only if I could keep the job. Every day, I had to prove I belonged here. That November was strange from the start. It should have been cold, but the heat hung around like a wet blanket. The air felt thick and wrong. Even the animals seemed nervous. I'd been tracking deer for weeks, but they'd vanished from their usual spots. The few I found had bite marks that didn't match any predator I knew. Local farmers started calling about their livestock. Cows and pigs found dead with weird wounds, not torn apart like a bear would do, but precise cuts, like something smart had done it. I told them it was probably wild dogs, but deep down I wasn't so sure. People in town whispered about the dog man, said it was some kind of monster that walked on two legs like a person but had the head of a wolf. I laughed at those stories. I'm a scientist. I study wildlife biology in college. Monsters aren't real. But the forest felt different that November. The normal sounds were wrong. Birds didn't sing like they should. At night I heard howling that didn't sound like any wolf I knew. It was too organized, too much like singing. Multiple voices working together in harmony. I'd been doing this job for 6 years, and I'd never felt scared in these woods. But that November, something was watching me. I could feel eyes on me every time I went out. When I'd turn around, nothing was there, just trees and shadows. The heat made everything worse. My uniform stuck to my skin. The air was so thick I could barely breathe. Thunderstorms rolled in every few days, but they didn't cool things down. They just made the humidity worse. I remember thinking this was going to be a long winter if it started like this. I had no idea how right I was. Everything changed on November 15th when Jake Morrison and his son Tyler went missing. Jake was one of the best hunters in the county. He'd been coming to these woods for 30 years. His boy Tyler was only 16, but he knew the forest almost as well as his dad. They weren't the type to get lost or do something stupid. They'd been out for 2 days on a hunting trip. Jake's wife called when they didn't come home. That was the first time in 20 years Jake had missed Sunday dinner. Something was wrong. I got partnered with Rick Donovan for the search. Rick was 34, been a ranger for 10 years. He made it clear from day one that he didn't like working with a woman. He thought I was weak, that I'd panic when things got tough. "Stay behind me, little lady," he said when we headed into the woods. "Let the men handle this." I wanted to punch him, but I needed this job. So I followed, keeping my mouth shut and my eyes open. We found Jake's truck first. It was parked at the old logging road, just like his whiff. He said it would be, but the driver's door was ripped clean off. Not opened, ripped off. The metal was bent and twisted like someone had used a can opener on it. "Jesus," Rick whispered. "What kind of animal can do that?" There was blood on the steering wheel. Not a lot, but enough to know someone got hurt. I took pictures and made notes while Rick called it in on the radio. That's when we found the tracks. They started normal. Jake's boots heading into the woods, Tyler's smaller prints beside them. But then other tracks joined them. At first, I thought they were dog prints, big ones. But as I looked closer, I realized they were wrong. These tracks showed claws like a dog, but they were too long, too narrow, and they were bipedal, walking on 2 legs like a person. The stride was 7 feet long. No dog walks like that. "Rick, look at this," I called him over. He studied the tracks, frowning. "Some kind of bear, maybe?" "Bears don't walk on 2 legs for this long," I said. "And look at the spacing. These things were coordinating, working together." There were at least 6 sets of tracks. They moved in formation like soldiers. Some took point, others flanked. It was too organized to be natural. We followed the trail deeper into the woods. The trees seemed to close in around us. Normal forest sounds faded away. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just our footsteps and heavy breathing. My radio crackled with static. I tried to call base, but all I got was white noise. Rick's radio was dead too. "Equipment failure," he said, but I could hear the worry in his voice. We found Jake Morrison 3 hours later. He was in his tree stand, 20 feet up an old oak. His rifle was across his lap, unfired. His hands were still gripping it, but his face... God, his face. Jake Morrison had died of fear. Pure, absolute terror. His mouth was open in a silent scream. His eyes were wide, staring at something that wasn't there anymore. The coroner would later say his heart had stopped from shock. But that wasn't the strangest part. Jake's rifle, a solid steel hunting rifle, was bent in half, twisted like a pretzel. No animal on earth is strong enough to do that. "How is this possible?" Rick kept saying. "How is this possible?" I was writing everything down, trying to make sense of it. Jake was an experienced hunter. He'd faced down bears and mountain lions. What could scare him to death? As we worked to get Jake's body down, I kept feeling like we were being watched. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound made me jump. Tyler was still missing, and whatever killed his father was still out there. We found Tyler the next morning, hanging from a tree branch like a grotesque Christmas ornament. The boy was 30 feet up, tied to a branch with his own belt. But that's not what made my blood run cold. Tyler had been positioned facing the trail, arms spread wide, like bait, like something wanted us to find him. "This is impossible," Rick said, his voice shaking. "How did they get him up there?" I was studying the scene, trying to understand what I was seeing. Tyler's body showed bite marks, but they were precise, calculated. not the random savagery of a wild animal attack. These bites were placed to cause maximum pain while keeping the victim alive as long as possible. "Rick, these bite marks," I said. "They're not random. Look at the pattern." The wounds showed intelligence, strategy. Whatever did this understood human anatomy. It knew exactly where to bite to cause fear without killing quickly. But the physics didn't make sense. The attack marks came from above and below at the same time, like Tyler had been surrounded in midair. Old Bill Hendricks, who owned the farm nearest to the woods, came by while we were working the scene. He was pale as a ghost, kept looking over his shoulder. "I seen 'em," he whispered. "Last night. Wolves walking like men. 7 of them, moving across my back field in a line." Rick laughed, but it sounded forced. "Come on, Bill, you been drinking again?" "I ain't had a drop in 3 months," Bill said. "These weren't regular wolves. They were too big, too smart, and they were talking to each other, not howling, talking, like people." I wanted to dismiss Bill's story, but something about his fear seemed real. This was a man who'd lived in these woods his whole life. He wasn't easily spooked. That night, Rick and I made camp near the Morrison hunting site. We needed to stay close to gather more evidence. Rick had started acting strange, jumpy, aggressive. He kept sniffing the air and looking around like he was hunting something. "You smell that?" he asked around midnight. I sniffed. The air did smell different. Wild, animal-like, but with something else underneath. Something that made my skin crawl. "Probably just deer," I said. But I didn't believe it. Rick was pacing around our camp like a caged animal. His eyes looked different, more alert, more predatory. When he looked at me, I saw something that made me step back. "Rick, you okay?" "I feel strange," he said. "Like I'm supposed to be hunting something. Like it's the most natural thing in the world." That's when we heard the howling. It started low, from the north. Then another voice joined in from the east. Then another from the south. They were surrounding us, these voices. But they weren't just howling. They were harmonizing, working together like a choir. My radio crackled to life. Through the static, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Voices. Human voices. But they were howling, making wolf sounds while speaking words I couldn't quite understand. "Cat," Rick said, and his voice was different, lower, more animal-like. "I think we need to run." But it was too late. The eyes were already there. 7 pairs of eyes, glowing in the darkness. Too high off the ground to belong to normal wolves, too intelligent to belong to any animal I knew. They moved closer, staying just outside our firelight. I could make out shapes, massive, bipedal, wrong. I moved like people, but had the silhouette of wolves. Rick was changing. I could see it happening. His breathing was getting deeper, more aggressive. His hands were clenched into claws. When he looked at me, I saw hunger in his eyes. "Fight it, Rick," I said, backing away from him. "Whatever this is, fight it." But he was already gone. The thing that had been Rick Donovan lunged at me with a sound that was half human scream, half wolf howl. I dove to the side, rolling behind a tree. Rick, or what used to be Rick, crashed into the trunk so hard the whole tree shook. The 7 pairs of eyes moved closer. I could hear them breathing, deep and steady. Patient. They were herding me like prey. I grabbed my rifle and ran. I ran through the forest like a crazy person, branches tearing at my clothes, rocks cutting my feet. Behind me, I could hear them following, not running. They didn't need to run. They were hunting me slowly, like wolves with a wounded deer. The howling surrounded me. It was coming from everywhere, above, below, all around. They were communicating, coordinating their attack. I was being herded towards something, but I didn't know what. My radio crackled again. This time I heard Rick's voice, but it wasn't Rick anymore. "Cat," the voice said, mixing human words with wolf sounds. "You can't run forever. Join us. It's easier if you don't fight." I stumbled into a clearing and saw them for the first time in full light. 7 creatures, each about 8 feet tall. They stood on 2 legs like people, but their bodies were covered in dark fur. Their heads were wolf-like with long snouts full of sharp teeth. But their eyes were human, intelligent, aware. The biggest one stepped forward. When it spoke, I recognized the voice. "Hello, cat." It was Rick. Still Rick, but transformed into something else. Something that shouldn't exist. "How?" I whisper. "Tattoo, it's a gift," Rick said, his voice a mixture of human and wolf. "The pack shares its strength. We hunt together. We're never alone." The other 6 creatures moved to surround me. Could see intelligence in their eyes, but also hunger. They were predators, and I was prey. "What happened to the Morrisons?" I asked. "They were practice," Rick said. "The pack was testing its new member, teaching me to hunt." "You killed them?" "We killed them. Together. Jake died of fear when he saw what I was becoming. Tyler we played with first, to see how fear tasted. I felt sick. These things weren't just animals. They were intelligent, organized, and completely without mercy." "Why me?" I asked. "Because you're strong," Rick said. "The pack needs strong members. You'll make a good hunter." The creatures moved closer. I could smell them now. Wild, animal-like, but with something else. Something that reminded me of old blood and deep caves. I remembered something my grandmother used to tell me. Old stories about creatures that could change between human and animal form. She said there was only one way to stop them. Silver. I looked down at my jewelry, my silver necklace, my grandmother's silver ring. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. "You don't have to do this," I said, backing toward the cliff edge. "Rick, you're still in there. I know you are." "Rick is gone," the creature said. "There's only the pack now." They rushed me all at once. I pulled out my emergency flare gun, the one every ranger carries for emergencies. But instead of a regular flare, I jammed my silver necklace into the barrel. It wouldn't kill them, but maybe it would hurt enough to make them back off. The flare hit the Rick creature square in the chest. Silver and fire exploded across its fur. It screamed. A sound, half human, half wolf, that made my ears ring. The other creatures stopped, staring at their wounded leader. For a moment they looked confused, lost. "Silver," I said, pulling off my grandmother's ring. "I bet you don't like silver." I threw the ring at another creature. Shum. When it hit, the thing dissolved into mist, then reformed several feet away. "You can't kill us all," Rick said, but his voice was weaker now, uncertain. "Maybe not," I said, standing at the edge of the cliff. "But I can make you remember what it's like to be human." I held up my field notebook, the one I'd been writing in for 6 years, the one that contained every detail of my life as a ranger. "I know who you all are," I said. "Under those wolf faces, you're still people. People with families, with lives, with choices." The creatures looked at each other. For a moment I saw confusion in their eyes. Doubt. "Remember," I said. "Remember who you used to be." Rick stumbled backward. The other creatures began to fade, like smoke in the wind. "This isn't over," Rick said, but his voice was fading too. "The pack will find you again." Then they were gone. All of them. Vanished into the forest like they'd never been there at all. They found me 2 days later, sitting on that cliff edge, staring into the woods. I was covered in cuts and bruises. My clothes were torn. I kept talking about wolves that walked like people, about Rick becoming something else, about Silver being the only thing that could hurt them. The official report said I'd been attacked by a pack of wild dogs. The pack had been eliminated, they said. Case closed. But I knew better. They transferred me to a desk job in St. Louis. Said I needed time to recover from the trauma. But I knew the real reason. I'd seen too much. I knew things they didn't want me to know. The nightmares started right away. I'd see Rick's face changing from human to wolf. I'd hear the howling in my dreams. Sometimes I'd wake up smelling that wild animal scent. But the worst part was the people. Normal people going about their daily lives. Sometimes I'd look at someone and see something else behind their eyes, something wild. So, me being hungry, I started carrying silver bullets in my gun, just in case. The Cherokee elders in the area weren't surprised when I told them what I'd seen. They had stories about creatures, like this. Skinwalkers, they called them. People who could take animal form. They're not evil, one elder told me. Just lost. They forgot how to be human. How do you stop them? I asked. You don't, he said. You just try to remind them who they used to be. 6 months later, they closed the hunting area where Jake and Tyler Morrison died. Said it was for wildlife management. But I knew the real reason. Other rangers had started reporting strange things. Coordinated animal attacks. Livestock found arranged in patterns. Howling that sounded too much like human voices. I still work for the Forest Service, but now I have a different job. I monitor reports of unusual animal behavior. I investigate cases where the official explanation doesn't quite fit. I carry my silver bullets everywhere. My radio is always tuned to the right frequency. And I keep my grandmother's stories close to my heart, because I know they're still out there. The pack, waiting in the deep woods, hunting together, sharing their dark gift with anyone strong enough to survive the transformation. Last week I got a call from a ranger in Arkansas. He'd found hunters with their weapons twisted into impossible shapes, bite marks that showed too much intelligence, tracks that walked on 2 legs but belonged to something that wasn't quite human. What do you think it is? He asked. I looked out my office window at the city streets, at all the normal people going about their normal lives. But I knew some of them weren't normal. Some of them had seen things they couldn't explain. Some of them carried secrets that would drive most people insane. When the pack hunts in formation, I told him, you're not facing animals anymore. And somewhere in the deep woods of Missouri, I swear, I can still hear them howling. End. My name is Michael Stone, but everyone calls me Mike. I'm a park ranger at Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico, and I've been going into caves for 16 years. I know every crack, every drop, every dangerous spot in these underground worlds. I've saved 31 people from caves over the years. That's something I'm proud of. But there's one rescue I couldn't make. 3 years ago, a young man named Tommy fell into a deep hole during a storm. By the time we found him, it was too late. His family blamed me. They said I didn't try hard enough. Maybe they were right. That failure sits heavy on my chest every day. It was October 1971 when everything changed. The weather had been strange all week, warm air coming up from the deep caves when it should have been cool, and the bats acting nervous, flying around during the day. Old Pete, one of the Apache men who worked with the park, kept shaking his head. The bone crushers are waking up, he said. The deep places are getting restless. I laughed it off. Pete was always telling stories about spirits and monsters in the caves. I figured it was just his way of keeping tourists from going where they shouldn't. But now I know better. Now I know Pete was trying to warn me. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. A team of 4 cave experts had been exploring the deep sections for 3 days. They were supposed to check in every 12 hours, but we hadn't heard from them in 36 hours. The team leader was Dr. Sarah Chen, a rock scientist who knew caves almost as well as I did. If Sarah was in trouble, it had to be serious. I packed my gear, carbide lamp, plenty of rope, emergency flares, and my small pack of dynamite for emergencies. In 1971, we didn't have fancy equipment. We had strong backs, good rope, and carbide lamps that could burn for hours. That was usually enough. The storm was getting worse. Rain poured down, and I could hear thunder rolling across the desert. Water was already starting to flood the main entrance. If we didn't find the team soon, the rising water would block all the normal ways out. I went down with Eddie Kowalski, our rope expert. Eddie was good at his job, but he hated tight spaces. He only did cave rescues because he was the best we had with ropes and climbing gear. As we walked toward the cave mouth, I could see him sweating even though it was cold. "Mike," he said, "something feels wrong about this one." I clapped him on the shoulder. "They're probably just lost in the new passages. We'll find them." But as we stepped into the cave, I felt it too. The air was too warm, and there was a smell like rotten eggs coming from somewhere deep below. Our carbide lamps flickered, which they never did, and the normal sounds of the cave, the drip of water, the whisper of air through cracks, were different, quieter, like the cave was holding its breath. We found their base camp about half a mile in. Their tents were still there, but something was wrong. Equipment was scattered everywhere. Ropes were cut, not broken, and there were scratch marks on the stone walls, deep gouges that looked like they were made by something with huge claws. "What could do that?" Eddie asked, running his fingers along the marks. I didn't have an answer. The marks were too deep and too regular to be natural, and they were fresh. We followed the team's route deeper into the cave. The passages here were narrow and twisted, and our lights kept acting strange. Sometimes they'd burn bright, sometimes they'd dim to almost nothing. Eddie was breathing hard, and I could see sweat on his face. "Maybe we should go back and get more people," he said. But I thought about Tommy, about failing another rescue. "We keep going. They're down here somewhere." The first body we found was Jim Watson, one of the team members. He was in a passage so narrow I had to crawl to reach him. When I got close enough to see him clearly, I felt sick. Jim was crushed, not like he'd been hit by rocks or caught in a cave-in. His ribs were pressed flat against his spine like something had squeezed him slowly, carefully. But there wasn't a mark on him. No cuts, no bruises. Just crushed. "Eddie," I called back. "I need you to see this." Eddie crawled up beside me and took one look at Jim. His face went white. "That's not possible, Mike. What could do that?" Jim's helmet light had melted. The metal was twisted and warped like it had been in a fire, but there was no sign of burning anywhere else. I touched it and pulled my hand back fast. It was still warm. We marked the spot and kept going. The passage opened up into a big chamber I'd never seen before, even though I'd mapped most of this section years ago. That was impossible. I knew these caves better than my own house. Dr. Sarah Chen was 20 feet above us, wedged into a crack in the ceiling. Getting her down was going to be tricky, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that she was crushed too, just like Jim. But this time, the crushing had come from all sides at once. It was like she'd been squeezed by a giant hand. Below her, we found Lisa Park, the fourth team member. She was alive but not talking. She just sat there, staring at nothing, rocking back and forth. When I tried to talk to her, she looked at me with wide, scared eyes. "The bone crusher," she whispered. "It likes the sound they make when they break." Then she started crying and wouldn't say anything else. Eddie was getting more nervous by the minute. "Mike, we need to get out of here. Something's very wrong." I checked Lisa for injuries. She seemed okay, but when I touched her arm, I could feel something strange. Her bones felt soft, like they'd been squeezed and then let go. The doctor later said she had tiny cracks in every bone in her body. "Where's the fourth team member?" I asked Lisa. She pointed deeper into the cave. "It took us to down where the walls move." That made no sense. Cave walls don't move. But as we helped Lisa toward the entrance, I started to notice something strange. The passages we'd come through seemed different, narrower, like they were slowly getting smaller. Our lights flickered again, and in the moment of darkness I heard something, a sound like bones breaking, echoing from somewhere deep in the cave. Eddie heard it too. "What was that?" he asked. I didn't answer because I didn't know, but every instinct I had was screaming at me to run. The problem was we couldn't run. Not yet. There was still one person down there, and I wouldn't leave anyone behind. Not again. We got Lisa to a safe spot near the entrance and went back in. The cave felt different now, angry. The warm air was getting warmer, and that rotten egg smell was stronger. Our lights were acting worse, dimming and brightening like something was playing with them. "Mike," Eddie said, "the passage is getting smaller." I looked around. He was right. The walls seemed closer together than they had been an hour ago. That was impossible, but I could see it happening. The cave was slowly crushing itself closed, and somewhere in the darkness ahead of us, Something was moving. The sound came again, that horrible cracking noise like someone stepping on dry branches. But I knew it wasn't branches. It was bones breaking. Eddie grabbed my arm. "Mike, we're getting out of here. Now!" But before we could move, we saw it. Just for a second, in the edge of our lamplight, a hand. But it was huge, bigger than any human hand could be, pale white, with long fingers that ended in black claws. It was reaching around a corner, feeling along the wall. We both froze. The hand moved slowly, carefully, like it was searching for something. Then it found one of the scratch marks on the wall and traced it with one finger. The stone cracked and hid under its touch. The hand pulled back into the darkness, and we heard footsteps. But they weren't normal footsteps. They were too heavy, too slow, and they echoed in a way that made my teeth hurt. "What was that?" Eddie whispered. I didn't know, but I knew we had to find the last team member fast. The passages were definitely getting smaller. In some places, I had to turn sideways to get through spaces that had been wide enough to walk through normally just an hour before. We found fresh scratch marks on the walls, long, deep gouges that were still warm to the touch. Whatever was making them was close. The cracking sound came again, louder this time, and Eddie started shaking. "I can't do this, Mike. The walls are too close. I can't breathe." Eddie's fear of small spaces was getting worse. The passage we were in was about 3 feet wide, plenty of room normally, but now it felt like it was crushing in on us. I could feel the weight of all that stone above us, pressing down. Then we heard a scream, a human scream, coming from somewhere ahead of us. It was cut off suddenly, followed by that terrible cracking sound. "That's him," I said. "That's the last team member." We moved as fast as we could through the narrowing passages. The walls were definitely closing in now. I could touch both sides at once in places where I used to be able to spread my arms wide. The cave was alive, and it was trying to crush us. Our lights went out at the same time, complete darkness. Eddie started breathing very fast. "Mike, I can't see anything. The walls are touching me." I fumbled for my emergency flare and lit it. The red light filled the passage, and I saw something that made my blood freeze. The creature was right there, not 10 feet away from us. It was huge, at least 10 feet tall, but hunched over so it could fit in the passage. Its skin was white as old bone, and its arms were too long, reaching almost to the ground. Its face was almost human, but wrong, too big, with black eyes that reflected our light like a cat's. And its hands, those horrible hands with fingers like broken sticks. But the worst part was what it was holding. The body of the fourth team member, Dave Martinez. The creature was squeezing him slowly, and I could hear his bones cracking like twigs. The creature looked at us with those black eyes, and I understood. This wasn't just an animal. It was smart. It knew we were there, and it was enjoying our fear. Eddie screamed and tried to run, but the passage behind us was too narrow now. He got stuck, wedged between the walls. The creature dropped Dave's body and started moving toward us. "Mike!" Eddie was trapped, and the creature was getting closer. I lit another flare and threw it at the thing. It didn't seem to hurt it, but it backed away from the light. That gave me an idea. "Eddie, the dynamite! I have dynamite!" But Eddie was stuck and panicking. The creature reached out with one of those long arms and grabbed him around the waist. I heard his ribs crack as it lifted him off the ground. "Mike, help me!" Eddie's voice was high and scared. I pulled out a stick of dynamite and lit the fuse. "Let him go!" The creature looked at me and made a sound like rocks grinding together. Then it squeezed Eddie harder. I heard more bones break, and Eddie stopped screaming. The creature dropped Eddie and turned toward me. My friend was dead, and it was my fault. I'd failed again. The dynamite was burning down fast. I had to choose, try to save Eddie's body or save myself. The creature was reaching for me with those horrible hands. I threw the dynamite and ran. The explosion shook the whole cave. Rocks fell from the ceiling and dust filled the air. When it cleared, the creature was gone, but I could hear it moving somewhere in the darkness. It wasn't dead, just angry. I found Eddie's body in the rubble. His bones were crushed just like the others, but his eyes were still open, staring at me. Another person I couldn't save. The explosion had opened up a new passage, one that led deeper into the cave than I'd ever been. Hot air was rushing out of it, carrying that rotten egg smell and something else. The smell of old death. I knew I should run. I should get out of the cave and seal it forever. But I also knew this thing would kill again if I didn't stop it. More people would die, and it would be my fault. I followed the passage deeper. The walls here were covered in those scratch marks, thousands of them, like the creature had been clawing at the stone for years. The passage opened into a huge chamber, and when I lit my last flare, I saw something that made me sick. Bones. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They were piled against the walls like firewood, and they were old. Some of them looked like they'd been there for centuries. This creature had been killing people for a very long time. In the center of the chamber, the creature was waiting for me. It was bigger here, standing at its full height. Its black eyes reflected my flare light, and when it opened its mouth, I saw teeth like broken glass. "You cannot leave," it said. Its voice was like rocks falling down a deep hole. "You have seen too much." I understood then. This wasn't just a monster. It was a guardian, protecting something deep in the cave, and it had been killing anyone who got too close for hundreds of years. "What are you?" I asked. It tilted its head. "I am the Bone Crusher. I keep the deep places safe. You surface dwellers are too curious, too greedy. You take and never give back." The creature started moving toward me, and I could see the walls of the chamber getting smaller. It was going to crush me just like it had crushed the others. I had 2 sticks of dynamite left. If I was going to die, I was going to take this thing with me. "I'm not like them," I said. "I save people. I don't take things." The creature stopped. "You failed to save your friend. You failed to save the boy. You will fail to save yourself." It knew about Tommy. Somehow this monster knew about every person I'd failed to save. The guilt hit me like a physical weight. "That's right," I said. "I failed, but I'm not going to fail again." I lit both sticks of dynamite and held them up. "If I die, you die with me." The creature's eyes went wide. For the first time, it looked scared. "You would destroy yourself to stop me?" "Yes." The creature looked at the bones piled around the chamber, then back at me. "Very well. Leave this place. Seal the passages. Tell your people that the deep places are forbidden. Do this, and I will sleep again. And if I don't, then I will come to the surface. I will crush every bone in your town until you learn to stay away." I believed it. This thing was old and powerful, and it had been patient for centuries. It could wait, but it could also kill everyone I cared about. "I'll seal the passages," I said, "but you have to promise, no more killing." The creature nodded slowly. "The bargain is made." I backed away, holding the lit dynamite. The creature watched me go, and I could feel its black eyes on my back until I was out of the chamber. I used the last of my dynamite to seal the deep passages. The explosions brought down tons of rock, blocking the way to the creature's chamber. Then I made my way to the surface, carrying Eddie's body. The official report said there was a cave-in due to the storm and unstable rock. 4 people died in a tragic accident. I was the only survivor, and I was treated like a hero for trying to save them. But I knew the truth. I'd made a deal with a monster, and I had to keep my end of the bargain. The first thing I did was talk to old Pete. When I told him about the Bone Crusher, he just nodded. "My grandfather's grandfather knew about that one," he said. "They called it the Guardian of the Deep Places. It was sleeping for many years, but the new people woke it up with their digging and exploring." "Why didn't you tell? Me?" Pete shrugged. "You wouldn't have believed me. White people never believe the old stories until it's too late." He was right. I wouldn't have believed him. But now I had to make sure nobody else made the same mistake. The Park Service agreed to permanently seal the deep passages for visitor safety. I made sure the seals were strong and that nobody could get through them. I also started watching the cave entrances, looking for signs that the creature might be trying to get out. But the real change was in me. I couldn't go into small spaces anymore. Even thinking about it made me sweat and shake. My doctor said it was trauma from the cave-in, but I knew better. The creature had gotten into my head, and it was still there. I was transferred to surface duties. I became a naturalist, teaching visitors about the safe parts of the cave. I never went more than 100 feet underground, and I never went alone. Sometimes, late at night, I could hear things moving in the sealed passages. Scratching sounds, like claws on stone. And sometimes tourists would report that their lights flickered in certain parts of the cave, or that they heard sounds like bones breaking in the distance. I always checked these reports personally. So far, the seals were holding, but I know it's still down there. The bone crusher, the guardian of the deep places, waiting, watching, ready to keep its promise if I don't keep mine. That's why I'm telling you this story, because someday I'll be gone, and someone else will need to know the truth. The deep places aren't empty, they're not safe, and some doors should never be opened. If you ever find yourself in a cave and the walls start feeling closer than they should be, if your lights start flickering for no reason, if you hear sounds like bones breaking in the darkness, run. Run fast, and don't look back. Because the bone crusher is still down there, and it's still hungry. And when the walls start closing in, it's already too late. My name is Thomas Blackhawk, and I need to tell you about what happened in the Manistee National Forest in October 1989. I've been a park ranger for 12 years now, and I've seen things that would make most people quit their jobs and move to the city. But nothing prepared me for what I encountered that hunting season. People call me Tom. I'm 35, Ojibwe, and I know these woods better than most folks know their own backyards. My grandfather taught me to track when I was 7 years old. He'd take me out before dawn and show me how to read the forest like a book. Every broken twig, every scuff mark in the dirt, every change in the way birds sang. It all told a story. The Manistee is my territory. I've tracked 47 dangerous animals in my career, black bears, wolves, even a few mountain lions that wandered down from Canada. I carry my service rifle, but I also keep my grandfather's bow and arrows in my truck. He always said some things needed to be handled the old way. October 1989 was strange from the start. The weather couldn't make up its mind. Days were warm like summer, but nights dropped below freezing. Heavy fog rolled in every morning, so thick you couldn't see 10 feet ahead. And the electrical storms, I'd never seen anything like them. Lightning would crack across clear skies, and the radio would fill with static for hours afterward. But it was the animals that really bothered me. Deer were missing from their usual spots. I'd check areas where I'd seen the same herds for years, and they were just gone. The few deer I did find were skittish, jumping at every sound. Even the squirrels seemed nervous, chattering constantly like they were warning each other about something. Other rangers noticed it too. Jim Martinez, who worked the southern section, told me he'd found 3 different spots where deer had been bedded down, but something had scared them. I'm off in the middle of the night. No tracks, no scent marks, nothing to explain what had spooked them. I respected the old stories my grandfather told me. Tales of creatures that walked between the world of animals and the world of spirits. But I was also a professional. When hunters started calling in reports of a dog man or wolf that walked like a man, I figured they were seeing bears. Black bears can stand on their hind legs and look pretty scary in the right light. That's what I thought anyway. Until Bob Miller and his crew went missing. The Miller brothers, Bob and Dan, had been hunting these woods for 15 years. They knew what they were doing. Bob was the careful one, always checking his equipment twice. Dan was the better shot, but Bob was the planner. Their friend Roy Clark had been hunting with them for the past 5 years. These weren't city guys playing dress-up in the woods. These were serious hunters who respected the forest and knew how to survive in it. They'd gotten permits for a section about 8 miles north of the main camping area. It was good deer country, but remote. The only way in was by logging roads that turned into muddy tracks when it rained. They'd set up camp on Thursday, planning to hunt through Sunday. When they didn't check in by Sunday night, Bob's wife called the ranger station. She wasn't the type to panic, but she knew her husband's habits. Bob called every night during hunting season, without fail. When Monday morning came and went with no word, she asked us to check on them. I took the call. It was my job, and I knew that area better than anyone. The plan was simple: drive out to their camp, make sure they were okay, and probably give them a lecture about keeping in touch. I figured their radio had died or they'd gotten their truck stuck in the mud. I should have known better. The forest was trying to tell me something was wrong. As I drove the logging road that morning, I noticed the silence. No birds singing, no squirrels chittering. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. But I was thinking like a professional, not like my grandfather's grandson. I was about to learn the difference between hunting animals and hunting something that could hunt you back. I reached the Miller camp around 10 in the morning. The fog was just starting to lift, and I could smell their cold campfire before I saw their tents. Everything looked normal at first glance. 2 tents set up properly, truck parked where it should be, camp chairs arranged around the fire pit. But something felt wrong. The silence was too complete. When you're in the woods, there's always some kind of sound. Insects, birds, small animals moving through the underbrush. Here, it was like the forest was holding its breath. I called out as I approached. "Bob? Dan? Anybody here?" My voice seemed to disappear into the fog without an echo. I walked through the camp, checking everything. The tents were zipped shut, sleeping bags still laid out inside. Their food was stored properly, hung up to keep it away from bears. Their hunting rifles were cleaned and ready, leaning against a tree. That's when I found the first thing that made my skin crawl. 3 coffee cups sat on the makeshift table they'd made from a log. The coffee was still in them, covered with a thin skin of mold. It had been sitting there for days, but the cups were arranged in a perfect triangle, like someone had placed them there on purpose. I radioed back to the station. "Base, this is Ranger Blackhawk. I'm at the Miller camp. No sign of the hunters, but their gear is all here. Looks like they've been gone for a while." "Copy, Tom. Any signs of struggle?" I looked around again. That was the thing. There were no signs of struggle. No scattered equipment, no torn clothing, no blood. It was like they'd simply vanished in the middle of drinking their morning coffee. Negative. Everything's neat and tidy. Almost too neat. I started looking for tracks. The soft earth around the camp should have been full of footprints, but what I found didn't make sense. There were boot prints leading away from the camp in 3 different directions, like the men had split up for some reason. But mixed in with the boot prints were other tracks that made my blood run cold. They looked like wolf tracks, but bigger, much bigger. And they were placed too carefully, like the animal had been thinking about where to put each foot. I'd tracked hundreds of wolves over the years, and they don't move like that. Wolves run, they trot, they pad along efficiently. These tracks showed an animal that was stalking, taking its time, placing each step with purpose. I followed Bob Miller's trail first. His boots had left clear prints heading north toward the area where they'd planned to hunt. The strange tracks followed his, sometimes right next to his footprints, sometimes 20 yards to the side. Whatever had been following Bob was smart enough to stay hidden while it watched him. The trail led to a deer stand that Bob had set up in a big oak tree. I could see his orange hunting vest through the trees, and for a moment I felt relieved. Then I got closer and saw that Bob was still in the stand, but he wasn't moving. Bob Miller was dead. He was sitting in his deer stand like he was still hunting, rifle across his lap, but his eyes were wide open and staring at nothing. His face was locked in an expression of absolute terror. I'd seen people who'd died of heart attacks before, but nothing like this. The strange thing was, his rifle hadn't been fired. A full magazine, safety still on, scope still capped. Whatever had killed Bob Miller, he'd never even tried to defend himself. He'd just sat there and died of fear. I called it in and waited for backup. While I waited, I noticed something that made my hands shake. Bob's rifle had one of those fancy scopes with tipple lenses. I looked through it, adjusting the focus, and there in the crosshairs was an image that shouldn't have been there. The scope somehow had caught a reflection or an image of something standing behind Bob's tree, something tall and dark that looked like it was watching him. But when I looked around the tree, There was nothing there. The image was burned into the scope like a photograph, but that was impossible. Rifle scopes don't work that way. Steve Coleman arrived about an hour later. Steve was a wildlife biologist who sometimes worked with the Park Service. He was 28, smart as hell, and he had a way of explaining things that made them seem less scary. I was hoping he could make sense of what I was seeing. "Heart attack," Steve said after examining Bob's body. "Probably brought on by extreme stress or fear. His heart just couldn't handle whatever he saw." "But what did he see?" I asked. "And why didn't he try to use his rifle?" Steve looked through the scope and saw the same image I had. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then he cleared his throat. "Camera obscura effect, maybe. Some kind of optical illusion caused by the fog and the angle of the light." I could tell he didn't believe it any more than I did. But we both needed some kind of explanation that made sense. The alternative was admitting that something had scared Bob Miller to death just by showing itself to him. We found Dan Miller 2 hours later. He was in a hunting blind about a quarter mile from Bob's tree stand. Like his brother, he was dead with no obvious cause. But Dan's body told a different story. He'd been positioned carefully, almost like he was bait in a trap. His rifle was missing. We found it 50 yards away, broken in half like something had snapped it over its knee. The barrel was twisted into an impossible shape, and there were deep gouges in the metal that looked like claw marks. "No animal did this," Steve said, holding the ruined rifle. "This takes incredible strength and intelligence. Like something wanted to make sure he couldn't use it." That's when we heard Roy Clark calling for help. His voice was coming from the direction of the camp, weak and scared. We found him sitting by the cold fire pit, wrapped in a sleeping bag, shaking like a leaf. Roy was alive, but he wasn't making much sense. He kept talking about a wolf that thinks like a man, and how it had been watching them for days. He said it never came close enough to get a good look at, but it was always there, just at the edge of sight. "It's been playing with us," Roy whispered, "following us, learning our routines. Bob always sat in that tree stand from 6 to 8 in the morning. Dan always used the same hunting blind. It knew where we'd be." Steve tried to calm him down with scientific explanations, but Roy just shook his head. "You didn't see it, Doc. This thing isn't just smart. It's tactical. It knows how to hunt hunters." As we helped Roy pack his gear, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Our radio, which had been working fine all morning, was now picking up something else. Between the static and the official chatter, I could hear breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing that sounded almost human. But not quite. We got Roy Clark to the hospital in Manistee, but he wasn't much better after the doctors looked him over. No injuries, just exhaustion, and what they called acute stress reaction. He kept insisting that something had been hunting them, something that was too smart to be a normal animal. Steve and I drove back to the forest that afternoon. We needed to examine the scene more carefully and figure out what had really happened. The rational part of my mind was still trying to make sense of it all. Maybe it was a rogue bear, or a pack of wolves, or even a person playing some kind of sick game. But the part of me that remembered my grandfather's stories knew better. The forest felt wrong in a way that had nothing to do with science or logic. It felt like we were being watched by something that understood exactly what we were doing and why we were there. "There's something I need to show you," Steve said as we walked back through the camp. He'd been quiet on the drive back, thinking about something. "I found this while you were helping Roy." He led me to a spot about 30 yards from the camp where the ground was softer. There in the mud was a perfect print, bigger than any wolf track I'd ever seen. But it wasn't just the size that bothered me, it was the shape. The print showed claws, but also something that looked almost like fingers. And next to it was a smaller impression, like the creature had been using some kind of tool. "Steve," I said quietly, "what kind of animal uses tools?" He stared at the print for a long time. "In the wild? Chimpanzees, some birds, sea otters, but nothing in North America, and certainly nothing that would leave a track like this." As we knelt there studying the print, I heard something that made my blood freeze. It was the sound of our radio, back at the ranger truck, crackling to life. But we were 30 yards away, and the radio was turned off. The sound was coming from the forest itself. Somewhere in the trees around us, something was making the exact same static noise our radio made, like it was mimicking the sound. And underneath the static, I could hear that slow, deliberate breathing again. "We need to leave," I said. "Now." But Steve was staring into the trees with a look I'd never seen before. His face was pale and his hands were shaking. "Tom," he whispered, "there's something moving out there. Something big." I looked where he was pointing and saw it. About 60 yards away, partially hidden behind a cluster of pine trees, something was watching us. It was tall, much taller than a man, and it was standing upright. But it wasn't human. The proportions were all wrong, the shoulders too broad, the arms too long, and it was holding something that looked like Bob Miller's missing rifle. We backed away slowly. Tried not to make any sudden movements. The thing, whatever it was, didn't follow us, but I could feel it watching. Every step we took, every breath we drew, it was studying us like we were specimens in a lab. We made it back to the truck without incident, but I knew we weren't safe. As I started the engine, I caught a glimpse of movement in the rearview mirror. The creature was following us, staying just far enough back to remain mostly hidden, but making sure we knew it was there. The drive back to the ranger station should have taken 20 minutes. It took us 45 because I kept having to stop and check the mirrors. The thing was pacing us, sometimes visible through the trees, sometimes hidden, but always there. It was like it was escorting us out of its territory. "This is impossible," Steve kept saying. "Animals don't behave like this. They don't use tools. They don't plan ambushes. They don't play psychological games." But I was thinking about my grandfather's stories, about creatures that lived in the space between the world of animals and the world of spirits, about things that could think like humans but had the power and instincts of wild beasts. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the way the creature had been watching us, the intelligence in its posture, the way it had positioned Dan Miller's body like bait. This wasn't just a dangerous animal. It was a predator that understood tactics and strategy. The next morning, I got a call that made my worst fears come true. 2 more hunters had gone missing in the same area. Jim Patterson and his son Kevin had been hunting about 2 miles from the Miller camp. They'd been missing for 8 hours, and their truck was still parked at the trailhead. Steve and I drove out to find them, but this time we weren't alone. I'd called in for backup, and we had 2 more rangers with us, plus a search and rescue team from the county. If there was a dangerous animal in the forest, we were going to find it and deal with it. But as we approached the area where the Pattersons had been hunting, our radios started acting up again. Static, interference, and underneath it all, that same slow breathing. The search and rescue team leader, a guy named Mike Torres, kept trying to adjust his radio, but nothing worked. "Must be atmospheric interference," he said. "These storms have been playing hell with electronics all week." I didn't tell him that the interference seemed to be following us. Every time we moved, the static moved with us. And I was starting to hear something else in the background. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps that matched our pace exactly. We found Jim Patterson's rifle first. It was hanging from a tree branch about 10 feet off the ground, tied there with what looked like his own bootlaces. The rifle was unloaded, and the ammunition was scattered on the ground below in a perfect circle. "What kind of animal hangs a rifle in a tree?" one of the rangers asked. "The kind that's smarter than we are," I answered. We found Kevin Patterson 100 yards away, alive but unconscious. He was lying in a small clearing, positioned so that anyone looking for him would have to walk directly into the open. When we woke him up, he was completely incoherent, babbling about the thing with hands, and eyes like a man but not a man. Jim Patterson was never found. We searched for 3 days, but there was no trace of him. It was like he had simply vanished from the face of the earth. But on the second day of searching, we found something that changed everything. Deep in the forest, In a clearing that none of us had ever seen before, we discovered what looked like a camp. But it wasn't a human camp. There were bones arranged in careful patterns, all of them from deer and smaller animals. Pieces of hunting equipment, rifles, knives, clothing, were displayed like trophies. And in the center of it all was something that made my blood run cold. It was a crude, but effective recreation of a hunting blind, built from branches and forest debris. But it was built for something much larger than a human, and scattered around it were things that could only be described as tools. Sharpened sticks, stones modified for cutting, and what looked like a crude spear made from a broken rifle barrel. "Jesus Christ," Steve whispered. "It's been learning. It's been watching hunters and learning how to use their own methods against them." That's when I realized what we were really dealing with. This wasn't just a dangerous animal. This was something that combined the intelligence of a human with the instincts and power of an apex predator. It was hunting us the same way we hunted deer, by learning our patterns, understanding our behavior, and using our own tactics against us. And it was getting better at it. The Forest Service wanted to close the hunting area immediately, but it was peak season and there were hundreds of hunters already in the woods. Instead, they decided to organize a systematic search to find and eliminate what they were calling a rogue predator. I knew it was a mistake. This thing had been watching us, learning from us, and now we were going to march into its territory with a bunch of armed men who had no idea what they were up against. But I also knew I was the only one who understood the forest well enough to have a chance of tracking it. Steve insisted on coming with me, even though I could tell he was terrified. "This is the most important biological discovery in North American history," he said. "I can't let it slip away." We joined the search party at dawn on the fourth day. 23 men, all armed, all experienced hunters or law enforcement. The plan was to spread out in a grid pattern and sweep through the forest systematically. If we found the creature, we'd surround it and take it down. It was a good plan for hunting, a normal animal. For this thing, it was suicide. The first sign of trouble came when our radio started picking up interference again. But this time, the static was different. It was rhythmic, almost like Morse code. And underneath it, I could hear what sounded like voices. Human voices, but distorted, like they were being played back through a broken speaker. "That's impossible," the search team leader said. "Radios don't work that way." But I was listening to the voices, and I was starting to recognize them. They were the voices of the missing hunters, Bob Miller, Dan Miller, Jim Patterson. Their last words, somehow captured and played back by the creature. That's when I understood what we were really dealing with. This wasn't just an intelligent predator. This was something that existed in the space between the natural world and the supernatural world. Something that could manipulate not just the environment, but reality itself. Steve grabbed my arm. "Tom, look at the trees." I looked where he was pointing and saw them. Scratches in the bark, but not random scratches. These were symbols, carved deliberately into the trees. They formed a pattern that led deeper into the forest, like a trail of breadcrumbs. "It's leading us somewhere," I said. "Or leading us into a trap," Steve replied. We followed the symbols, and the other search teams followed us. With every step, the radio interference got stronger, and the voices got clearer. I could hear Bob Miller's last words. "What is that thing? Dear God, what is that thing?" And Dan Miller, "It's not an animal, it's something else." The symbols led us to the same clearing where we'd found the creature's camp. But now it was different. The bones were arranged in new patterns, and the hunting equipment was displayed like it was waiting for us. And in the center of the clearing, standing next to the crude hunting blind, was the creature itself. It was 9 feet tall, covered in dark fur that looked almost black in the shadows. Its body was like a cross between a bear and a wolf, but it stood upright like a man. Its arms were long and powerful, ending in hands that looked almost human but had claws instead of fingernails. But it was the eyes that terrified me the most. They were intelligent, calculating, and completely aware of what was happening. This thing understood that we were there to kill it, and it had planned for this moment. It was holding Jim Patterson's rifle, and it was pointing it at us. "Nobody move," I whispered. "Nobody even breathe." The creature tilted its head, studying us. Then it did something that made my blood freeze. It spoke, not in words, but in the voices of the dead hunters. Bob Miller's voice came out of its mouth. "Help me. Please, help me." Then Dan Miller's voice. "It's been watching us for days." Then Jim Patterson. "Kevin, run. Just run." The search party started to panic. Some of the men raised their rifles, others backed away. But the creature was faster than anything I'd ever seen. It dropped the rifle and charged. What happened next was chaos. The creature moved through the search party like a force of nature, knocking men down, scattering weapons, creating confusion and terror. But it wasn't trying to kill anyone. It was separating us, dividing us into smaller groups. Steve and I ended up alone, cut off from the others. The creature was somewhere in the forest around us, and I knew it was hunting us specifically. We'd been the ones asking questions, the ones getting too close to the truth. "We need to get out of here," Steve said. "We need to run." But I was thinking about my grandfather's stories, about creatures that lived between worlds, about spiritual warfare, about the difference between fighting an animal and fighting something that was part spirit. "Running won't help," I said. "This thing has been playing with us from the beginning. It knows where we'll go, what we'll do. We need to fight it, but not the way we'd fight an Enmuus. Imal." I reached into my backpack and pulled out the items I'd brought from home. My grandfather's arrows, blessed by the tribal elders, a small pouch of sage and sweetgrass, and an emergency flare gun that I'd modified with prayers and sacred symbols. "What are you doing?" Steve asked. "Something my grandfather taught me," I said. "When you're fighting a creature that's part spirit, you need spiritual weapons." The creature appeared at the edge of the clearing, and for the first time I saw it clearly. It was magnificent and terrible, a perfect predator that combined the best qualities of multiple animals with human intelligence. But there was something else, something that didn't belong in the natural world. It was corrupted, twisted by anger or pain or something else that had turned it from a guardian of the forest into a hunter of humans. The creature and I faced each other across the clearing. It had learned to use human tools and tactics, but I had something it couldn't understand. The spiritual knowledge passed down through generations of my people. I knocked one of my grandfather's arrows and spoke the words he'd taught me. The arrow flew true, striking the creature in the shoulder. It howled in pain and rage, but it didn't fall. Instead, it charged. The final battle was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. The creature was incredibly strong and fast, but the blessed arrows seemed to hurt it in ways that normal weapons couldn't. And when I fired the modified flare gun, the creature actually retreated, as if the blessed fire was something it couldn't face. But I was only human, and the creature was something more. It caught me with one of its claws, ripping 3 deep gashes across my chest. I fell to the ground, bleeding and exhausted. The creature stood over me, ready to finish what it had started. But then it stopped. For a moment its eyes seemed almost human, and I saw something that might have been pain or regret. Then it turned and walked away, disappearing into the forest like a shadow. They found me 4 days later, barely alive and delirious from blood loss and infection. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital, and when I finally told them what had happened, they said it was trauma-induced hallucinations. The official report listed the whole incident as a rogue bear attack, with the bear supposedly killed by other members of the search party. But I know what I saw. I know what I fought. And I know it's still out there. The hunting area was quietly closed for the rest of the season. They said it was for public safety and wildlife management, but I knew the real reason. The creature was still in the forest, still watching, still learning. I tried to go back to my regular duties, but I couldn't handle it. Every time I went into the deep woods, I felt like I was being watched. Every unusual sound made me reach for my grandfather's arrows, which I now carried everywhere. They transferred me to a desk job at the main office, handling paperwork and phone calls. The Ojibwe elders weren't surprised when I told them what had happened. They performed a purification ceremony and taught me more about spiritual warfare, about the creatures that lived in the space between worlds. They told me that what I'd encountered was a corrupted guardian spirit, something that had been twisted by anger and pain into a hunter of humans. "It's not evil," one of the elders told me. "It's lost. But lost spirits are sometimes more dangerous than evil ones. Other rangers started reporting unusual incidents. Animals behaving strangely, hunters finding their equipment moved or rearranged, radio interference in areas where there shouldn't be any. The creature was still active, still learning, still watching. I kept track of these reports, building a file that no one else would ever see. I knew that someday the creature would surface again, and when it did, I wanted to be ready. The worst part wasn't the nightmares or the scar, or the constant feeling of being watched. The worst part was the knowledge that I'd failed. I'd wounded the creature, driven it away, but I hadn't solved the real problem. Somewhere in the Manistee National Forest, there was still a spirit that had been corrupted by pain and anger, and it was still hunting. Steve Coleman quit his job with the Wildlife Service and moved to California. He never talked about what had happened, but I heard he'd started researching cryptozoology and folklore. He sent me a letter once, just a few lines. I can't stop thinking about it, the intelligence in its eyes, the way it learned our tactics. What if it's not the only one? I think about that sometimes. What if the creature we encountered wasn't unique? What if there are others scattered throughout the wilderness areas of North America, corrupted spirits that have learned to hunt humans using our own methods against us? I still work for the Forest Service, but now I have a different mission. I monitor the reports, I track the patterns, and I carry my grandfather's blessed arrows wherever I go. Because I know that someday, somehow, I'll encounter the creature again. And next time, I'll be ready. But until then, I have a warning for anyone who hunts in the deep woods. If you ever feel like you're being watched, if your radio starts picking up interference, if you find your equipment moved or rearranged, don't try to be brave. Don't try to hunt the hunter. Just leave. Walk away. Because when the hunted becomes the hunter, you're not fighting an animal anymore. You're fighting something that knows how to think like you, plan like you, and use everything you know against you. And it's been watching you longer than you think. My name is Thomas Blackhawk, and this is what happened to me in the Manistee National Forest in October 1989. I'm telling you this story not to scare you, but to warn you. Because the creature is still out there, and it's still learning, and it's still hunting. My name is Anthony Delacroix, and I need to tell you what really happened in the Pine Barrens back in 1974. People think they know the story, but they don't. The newspapers said it was just a forest fire that got out of control. They said the Rodriguez family got caught in it and died. That's not what happened. Not even close. I was 31 then, working as a ranger in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. My dad was a ranger before me, and his dad before him. The Delacroix family has been watching over these woods for 3 generations. I knew every sand road, every creek, every place where the fire liked to hide and grow. I could smell smoke from miles away and tell you which way the wind would turn. The Pine Barrens is a strange place. Most people drive through it and see nothing but scrub pine and sand. But if you know how to look, you see something else, something older. The trees whisper stories that go back hundreds of years, stories about things that shouldn't exist but do anyway. I collected those stories like some people collect stamps, not because I believed them, but because they were part of the place I loved. Every old-timer had a Jersey Devil story, some flying creature with bat wings and a horse's head that lived deep in the woods. I wrote them all down in a little notebook I kept in my truck. Just folklore, I told myself, just stories to scare kids around campfires. My fiancée Sarah used to laugh at that notebook. She taught 3rd grade in Hamilton and had more sense than to believe in monsters. "Tony," she'd say, "you spend too much time in those woods. You're starting to think like the trees." Maybe she was right. But the trees never lied to me. The summer of 1974 was the driest anyone could remember. We hadn't seen real rain in 6 weeks. The fire danger was so high that we closed most of the camping areas. The pine needles crunched under your feet, like broken glass. Everything was ready to burn. I was working out of the Batstow Fire Tower that July, checking the restricted areas twice a day. That's when I got the call on my CB radio. A family had gone missing in the woods near Leeds Point. The Rodriguez family, Miguel, Elena, and their daughter, Maria. They'd been camping in a restricted area, which was stupid but not unusual. People always thought the rules didn't apply to them. The state police said they'd lost contact with the family 18 hours ago. Miguel was supposed to check in with his brother in Camden every morning. When he didn't call, the brother got worried and called us. I loaded my truck with extra water and headed out on the sand roads toward Leeds Point. The air smelled wrong that day, not just dry, but sulfurous, like rotten eggs. I figured it was just the swamp gas from the cedar bogs, but it made my stomach turn. When I reached their last known campsite, I found their car first, a blue Ford station wagon with Pennsylvania plates, parked neat and tidy under some pine trees. Nothing wrong with it at all. But when I walked toward where they'd set up camp, the wrongness hit me like a wall. The tent was there, but it was burned. Not burned from the outside like you'd expect from a campfire that got out of control. Burned from the inside out. The metal tent poles were twisted and melted, but the grass around the tent was green and untouched. No scorch marks leading to it. No signs of any outside fire at all. I'd fought 23 forest fires in my career. I knew fire better than I knew my own face in the mirror. This wasn't natural fire. This was something else. I radioed for backup and started searching the area around the campsite. The state police sent over Carl Hoffman, a young forestry graduate who'd been working with us for about 6 months. Carl was smart, but he was one of those guys woo. Ho thought his college degree made him an expert on everything. Probably used white gas for their camp stove, he said when he saw the tent. That stuff burns hot and fast. Could have melted the tent poles. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But I'd seen white gas accidents before, and this wasn't one of them. We found the first set of tracks about 50 yards from the campsite. They looked like hoof prints, but they were wrong. Too big for a deer, too sharp for a horse. And they were burned into the sand, like whatever made them was so hot it cooked the ground. Probably a cow, Carl said. Farmers let their cattle wander sometimes. I didn't argue with him, but I knew better. I'd grown up in these woods. I knew the sound every animal made and the shape of every track. These weren't cow prints. We followed the tracks deeper into the woods. They led us away from the sand roads, into the thick pine where the trees grew close together and the light barely reached the ground. The sulfur smell got stronger with every step. My compass started acting funny. The needle would spin around and around like it couldn't find north. Carl blamed it on iron deposits in the soil, but I'd never seen anything like it before. That's when we heard the screaming. It came from deeper in the woods, high and sharp like a woman in terrible pain. But there was something else mixed in with it. Something that didn't sound human at all. We ran toward the sound, crashing through the underbrush. Carl was younger and faster, but I knew the woods better. I caught up to him when he stopped dead in his tracks. Miguel Rodriguez was hanging upside down from a pine tree about 8 feet off the ground. His clothes were burned away, but his skin was hardly touched. The fire had burned him from the inside out. His eyes were gone, just black holes in his head. His mouth was open in a silent scream. But here's the thing that made my blood turn to ice water. The tree wasn't burned. The pine needles around his body were green and perfect. Whatever had done this to Miguel was hot enough to cook a man from the inside, but it hadn't hurt the tree at all. Carl threw up in the bushes. I wanted to, but I'd seen worse things in Vietnam. I forced myself to look closer. Miguel's watch had melted around his wrist. The metal was twisted and warped like it had been in a furnace. But his wedding ring was perfect. Not a mark on it. "We need to get out of here," Carl said. He was pale as milk and shaking. "We need to call this in and let the detectives handle it." I was about to agree when we heard it again. The screaming. But this time it was coming from a different direction. And this time I recognized the voice. "Elena," I whispered. Miguel's wife. The screaming stopped suddenly, like someone had cut it off with a knife. The woods went quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no insects, no wind in the trees, just silence that felt like it was pressing down on us. Then we smelled smoke. The smoke was coming from the south, toward the cedar swamps. Carl and I ran back to my truck to get our firefighting gear. As we drove down the sandy road, I could see a column of black smoke rising above the trees. But when we got there, we found something impossible. Elena Rodriguez was standing in the middle of a perfect circle of fire. The flames were maybe 6 feet high, burning in a ring around her like someone had drawn it with a compass. She wasn't moving. She wasn't screaming anymore. She was just standing there, looking up at the sky. The fire wasn't spreading. It wasn't burning the trees or the grass outside the circle. It was just burning in that perfect ring, like it was following rules that had nothing to do with wind or fuel or any of the things I knew about fire. "Elena!" I shouted. "Elena, can you hear me?" She turned to look at me, and I saw that her eyes were black holes, just like her husband's. The fire had burned her from the inside, too, but she was still standing. Ill-moving. Carl was already unrolling the hose from my truck. "We can hit it with the foam," he said. "Knock down the fire and get to her." I grabbed his arm. "No, something's wrong here. This isn't natural fire." "Fire is fire," he said. And he was right, except when he wasn't. He aimed the hose at the circle of flames and hit them with everything we had. The foam should have knocked them down in seconds. Instead, the fire seemed to grow stronger. It leaped higher, burned brighter, and Elena started to scream again. But this time, the screaming wasn't coming from her mouth. It was coming from the fire itself. Carl dropped the hose and backed away. "That's not possible," he kept saying. That's not possible." The fire suddenly went out all at once, like someone had blown out a candle. Elena fell to the ground and didn't move. When we got to her, she was burned the same way as Miguel, cooked from the inside, but her skin was barely touched. The ground where the fire had been was burned black in a perfect circle. But outside the circle, the grass was green, and the pine needles were untouched. "Where's the daughter?" I asked. "Where's Maria?" We found her 20 minutes later, hiding in a hollow log about a quarter-mile away. She was alive, but she was in shock. 12 years old, dark hair, big brown eyes that had seen too much. "Maria," I said gently. "I'm Tony. I'm here to help you. Can you tell me what happened to your parents?" She looked at me with those big eyes and whispered, "The devil came for them." Carl snorted. "Kid's in shock. She doesn't know what she's saying." But I knew better. I'd heard those words before, in the stories the old-timers told. The Jersey Devil. "What did it look like?" I asked her. "Like a horse with wings," she said. "Big wings, like a bat. It breathed fire. It breathed fire, and my daddy started burning from the inside." Carl was shaking his head, but I was listening. The description matched the stories in my notebook exactly. Stories that went back to the 1700s. "It's still here," Maria whispered. "I can feel it watching us." That's when the temperature started to rise. It happened fast. 1 second the air was normal, July hot. The next second it felt like we were standing next to a furnace. The pine needles started to curl and smoke. Carl's shirt started to steam. "Get to the truck," I said. "Now." But as we ran, I could hear something above us. Wings beating the air, something big, moving through the trees. Carl made it to the truck first. He was fumbling with the keys when his clothes caught fire. Not from a flame or a spark. They just started burning, like the fire was coming from inside him. He screamed and rolled on the ground, but the fire wouldn't go out. It was burning him the same way it had burned the Rodriguez family, from the inside out. I grabbed the fire extinguisher from the truck and tried to help him, but it was too late. The fire took him in less than a minute. When it was over, Carl was gone and I was alone with Maria. The thing in the trees was still there, still watching us. I could feel its eyes on us like hot coals. "We need to get out of here," I told Maria, "right now." But when I tried to start the truck, it wouldn't turn over. The engine was dead. The CB radio was dead. Even my watch had stopped. That's when I saw it. The Jersey Devil was perched in a pine tree about 50 yards away, 8 feet tall with wings that spread wider than my truck. It had the head of a horse, but the eyes were wrong. They glowed like coals in a fire. When it breathed, flames came out of its mouth. It looked at me, and I understood something that made my blood freeze. This wasn't just some animal. This was something that had been waiting for us, something that had been hunting us. And we were still a long way from help. The Jersey Devil dropped from the tree and landed on the sand road in front of us. Up close, it was even more terrifying. Its skin looked like burned leather, and its hooves were split like a goat's butt bigger. Much bigger. Maria grabbed my arm. It's going to burn us like it burned my parents. I looked around for anything that might help us. My firefighting gear was useless. The truck was dead. The CB radio was dead. We were trapped in the middle of nowhere with a creature that could kill us with its breath. That's when I remembered something my grandfather used to tell me. He'd grown up in these woods before they were a state forest, when the old families still lived here. He said the Jersey Devil was afraid of iron. Cold iron, he called it. Said it was the only thing that could hurt it. I had iron tools in my firefighting kit, an axe, a shovel, some tent stakes. I grabbed the axe and stood between Maria and the devil. Stay behind me, I told her. The devil tilted its head like it was curious. Then it opened its mouth and breathed fire at us. The heat hit me like a wall. I could feel my skin starting to burn, but I didn't catch fire like Carl did. The iron axe in my hand seemed to push the fire away, like it was a shield. The devil looked surprised. It tried again, breathing harder this time. The fire came out white hot, but it curved around us like we were inside a bubble. I didn't understand it, but I didn't waste time thinking about it. I charged the devil with the axe raised over my head. The creature was fast, but it wasn't expecting me to fight back. The axe caught it in the shoulder, and it screamed. Not like an animal, but like a person, in terrible pain. Black blood poured from the wound, and where it hit the ground, the sand turned to glass. The devil backed away, flapping its wings. It looked at me with those glowing eyes, and I saw something there I hadn't seen before. Fear. You're afraid of iron, I said. You're afraid of cold iron. The devil snarled and launched itself into the air. It circled above us, looking for an opening. But every time it dove down to attack, I swung the axe at it. The iron kept it back. We played this game for maybe 10 minutes. The devil attacking, me fighting it a F with the axe. Maria crouched behind me, praying in Spanish. Then the devil did something I wasn't expecting. It landed on the other side of my dead truck and started breathing fire at the gas tank. I understood what it was trying to do. If it could blow up the truck, the explosion would kill us both, and it would look like an accident. I ran around the truck, but I was too late. The gas tank caught fire and exploded. The blast knocked me off my feet and sent the axe flying. When I got up, the devil was standing over me. Its mouth was open, ready to breathe fire and cook me from the inside like it had done to the others. But Maria surprised us both. She picked up the axe and swung it at the devil's leg. The blade bit deep and the creature screamed again. It spun around and backhanded her, sending her flying into the trees. That made me angry. Angrier than I'd ever been in my life. I grabbed the shovel from my kit and went after the devil. It was bigger than me, stronger than me, and it could fly. But I had something it didn't have. I had iron, and I was fighting for a little girl who'd already lost her parents. The fight didn't last long. The devil was hurt and bleeding. Every time I hit it with the shovel, it got weaker. Finally, it spread its wings and flew away, disappearing into the deep woods. I found Maria unconscious but alive. Her arm was broken, but she was breathing. I carried her to the sand road and started walking toward the nearest fire tower. We were found 3 days later by a search party. They said we'd been missing for almost a week, but I could have sworn it was only 1 day. Time works differently in the deep woods, especially when the Jersey Devil is hunting you. The official report said that the Rodriguez family died in an accidental forest fire. They said Carl Hoffman was overcome by smoke and burned to death trying to save them. They said Aria and I were lucky to survive. They never mentioned the Jersey Devil. They never mentioned the impossible burns or the perfect circles of fire. They never mentioned the hoof prints burned into the sand. But I know what I saw. I know what really happened in those woods. Maria recovered from her injuries, but she never talked about what happened. Her relatives in Philadelphia took her in, and she grew up to be a teacher like my Sarah. Sometimes I get a Christmas card from her with no return address. She never signs her name, but I know it's from her. Sarah broke off our engagement after she saw what the fire had done to me. I was burned on my hands and face, but not from normal fire. The scars were strange, like they went deeper than just skin. She said I looked at her with different eyes, like I'd seen something that changed me. She was right. I had seen something, and I couldn't unsee it. The state transferred me to a different district after that. They said I needed a change of scenery. I spent the rest of my career fighting fires in normal forests, where the only things that burned were trees and grass and the occasional unlucky camper. But I kept my iron tools. I kept the axe and the shovel, and I never went anywhere without them, just in case. The Pine Barrens are still there, of course, still quiet and mysterious and full of stories. The area around Leeds Point is closed to camping now. They say it's because of fire danger, but I know better. Sometimes I drive out there on my days off. I park at the edge of the woods and listen. The trees still whisper their stories, and sometimes I think I can hear wings beating in the distance. The Jersey Devil is still out there. I know it is. It's waiting for the next dry summer, the next family that camps where they shouldn't. It's waiting for someone else to wander into its territory. And when that happens, I hope they're carrying iron. Because the devil's fire burns from the inside out, and once it starts, nothing can put it out except cold iron and the will to fight back. That's what really happened in the Pine Barrens in 1974. That's the truth they don't want you to know. But I'm telling you now, because someone needs to know. Someone needs to be ready. The Jersey Devil is real, and it's still out there, waiting in the deep woods where the fire likes to hide. Don't go looking for it. But if it comes looking for you, remember what I told you. Iron stops the devil's fire. Iron and the courage to use it. My name is Samuel Washington, and I've been a park ranger for 20 years. Most folks call me Sam. I know every creek, every muddy path, and every dangerous spot in the Ouachita National Forest. The swamps of Arkansas are my home, and I thought I knew all their secrets. I was wrong. It was July 1973, and the heat was killing everything. The air was so thick you could almost drink it. Even the alligators looked tired, lying in whatever shade they could find. My uniform stuck to my back like a second skin, and sweat dripped off my nose every few seconds. That morning I was checking the boat motor when my radio crackled to life. "Sam, you there?" It was Chief Ranger Miller, and he sounded worried. "Yeah, Chief. What's going on?" "We got a problem. Dr. Hayes and her research team haven't checked in for over a day. They were studying water plants deep in Boggy Creek. You know the area?" I knew it. Boggy Creek was about as far from civilization as you could get in our part of the swamp. The water was dark as coffee, and the trees grew so thick overhead that noon looked like evening. Even I didn't like going there alone. "I'll take a look," I said, though something in my gut told me this wasn't going to be a simple rescue. "Take someone with you. And Sam, be careful. Something feels off about this whole thing." I grabbed Luke Henderson, a marine biologist who'd been working with us for the summer. Luke was a smart guy, about 33, with the kind of curiosity that sometimes got people in trouble. He studied big water animals, alligators, snapping turtles, that sort of thing. "Ready for a boat ride?" I asked him. Luke grinned. "Always. What are we looking for?" "Missing scientists. Probably just radio trouble, but you never know." We loaded up my flat-bottom boat with emergency supplies, extra gas, and a first aid kit. The boat was perfect for swamp work. It could float in just a few inches of water and slip through the narrowest channels. I'd rescued 34 people from these swamps over the years, and that boat had never let me down. As we headed deeper into the swamp, I noticed things that made my skin crawl. The alligators were all moving in the same direction, away from Boggy Creek. In 20 years, I'd never seen them act like that. They were swimming fast, like something was chasing them. The birds were wrong, too. Usually the swamp was full of noise, frogs croaking, insects buzzing, birds calling. But as we got closer to Boggy Creek, everything went quiet. The only sound was our motor and the splash of water against the boat. "You hear that?" Luke asked. "Hear what?" "Exactly. Where are all the sounds?" I'd been thinking the same thing. The silence felt heavy, like the swamp was holding its breath. The water temperature was dropping too. In July, swamp water should be warm as a bath. But the further we went, the colder it got. By the time we reached the research area, the water felt like it came from a mountain spring. "That's not normal," Luke said, dragging his hand through the water. "Water this cold shouldn't exist here in summer." I was about to answer when we rounded a bend and saw the research station. My heart sank. The floating platform where Dr. Hayes had set up her equipment was torn apart. Expensive computers and testing gear lay scattered in the water, some pieces sinking, others floating like dead fish. Their boat was gone. Not just missing, gone. We found pieces of it hanging from tree branches 15 feet above the water line. The metal was twisted like someone had wrung it out like a wet towel. "What could do this?" Luke whispered. I didn't have an answer. In all my years, I'd never seen anything like it. Bears couldn't do this. Alligators couldn't do this. Even a tornado couldn't twist metal like that and leave it hanging in trees. Then I saw the handprints. They were pressed deep into the mud by the water's edge. At first I thought they were human. They had the right shape. But they were huge. My hand is pretty big, but these prints were twice the size. The fingers were longer than any human's, and there were deep claw marks at the tips. "Luke," I called, "come look at this." He bent down next to me, and I watched his face go pale. "Those aren't from any animal I know," he said. "They look almost human, but what? But no human has hands that big. And look at this." He pointed to the depth of the prints. "Whatever made these weighs a lot, way more than a person." I felt that old familiar fear creeping up my spine. It was the same feeling I got when I was lost in the swamp as a kid, when the darkness seemed to move and the water made sounds that weren't quite right. My son Jake was planning to become a ranger like me. He was only 16, but he already knew these swamps better than most adults. The thought of him facing whatever made these prints made my stomach turn. "We need to find the research team," I said. "They might still be alive." But as we got back in the boat, I caught Luke staring at the water with a strange look on his face. "What is it?" I asked. "I keep thinking about those prints, the way they were pressed into the mud. It's like whatever made them was coming out of the water, not going in." That's when I noticed something else. The water around the destroyed research station was moving wrong. It wasn't flowing with the current like it should. Instead, it was moving in slow circles, like something big was swimming just below the surface. Something that didn't want to be seen. We searched for 2 hours without finding any sign of the research team. The swamp stayed quiet, and that silence was getting to both of us. Luke kept checking the water temperature, and it kept getting colder. "This is impossible," he muttered. "Cold water sinks. Warm water rises. Basic physics. But this cold water is staying on top." I was about to tell him to forget the water temperature when my radio crackled. Static filled the air, mixed with something else, something that sounded like bubbles. "Dr. Hayes? Dr. Hayes, are you there?" I called into the radio. The static got worse. Then, clear as day, I heard a voice, a woman's voice, speaking very slowly. "Help us under the water?" Luke grabbed my arm. That sounded like someone talking underwater. That's impossible. Radio waves don't work underwater. But even as I said it, I knew something was very wrong. The voice came again, and this time it sounded like it was coming from below us, not from the radio. "Help us." Luke leaned over the side of the boat, looking down into the dark water. "Sam, there's something down there, something big." I looked where he was pointing. The water was so dark I couldn't see more than a few feet down. But there was movement, a shadow that was darker than the rest, moving slowly back and forth under our boat. "It's probably just a log," I said, but I didn't believe it. "Logs don't move like that." The shadow stopped moving. For a moment, everything was still. Then something bumped the bottom of our boat, hard. The whole boat rocked, and Luke fell backward. I grabbed the sides to keep from going over. Whatever hit us was big enough to lift a boat with 2 grown men in it. "Start the motor," Luke whispered. "Start it now." I yanked the cord, but the motor just coughed and died. I tried again. Nothing. The third time, it caught, and I gunned it toward shore. Behind us, the water exploded. Something huge broke the surface, sending waves in all directions. I only got a quick look, but what I saw made no sense. It was covered in dark hair, with arms as thick as tree trunks, and it was tall, way taller than any man. "Did you see that?" Luke shouted over the motor noise. "I saw something. I don't know what." We made it to shore and pulled the boat up on a muddy bank. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely tie the rope. Luke was staring back at the water, his face white as paper. "We need to get out of here," he said. "We can't leave without the research team." "What research team? Did you see the size of that thing? If it got them—" He didn't finish, but I knew what he meant. I'd seen what it did to their boat. I didn't want to think about what it could do to people. That's when we found the first body. Mark Thompson was one of Dr. Hayes' graduate students, a skinny kid, maybe 22 years old. We found him in a cypress tree, about 20 feet off the ground. He was just hanging there like someone had tossed him up into the branches. "How did he get up there?" Luke asked. I didn't answer. I was too busy trying not to throw up. Mark's body was broken. His arms and legs were bent in ways that arms and legs weren't supposed to bend. It looked like he'd been squeezed by something with incredible strength. But here's the thing that really got to me. There wasn't a mark on him. No bites, no scratches, no blood. He was just crushed. "Help me get him down," I said. It took us 20 minutes to get Mark's body out of the tree. When we laid him on the ground, I noticed something that made my blood go cold. He was wearing a diving suit, the kind with a heavy air tank, but the tank was crushed flat, like someone had stepped on a soda can. "Look at this," Luke said, pointing to the gauge on the tank. "This shows he was at 60 feet underwater when this happened. That's impossible. The deepest part of this swamp is maybe 15 feet. I know what I'm reading, Sam. This gauge says he was 60 feet down, in water that doesn't exist." I stared at the crushed tank. In all my years as a ranger, I'd never seen anything like it. Whatever got Mark was strong enough to crush solid metal and smart enough to put his body in a tree where we'd find it. Like it was sending us a message. We wrapped Mark's body in a tarp and loaded it into the boat. Neither of us said much. We were both thinking the same thing. If this happened to Mark, what happened to the others? As we prepared to leave, I heard something that made my skin crawl. Splashing. Big splashing, like something huge was moving through the water. But when I looked, I couldn't see anything. "It's following us," Luke whispered. "You don't know that." "Listen." I listened. The splashing was keeping pace with us as we walked along the shore. Whatever was making the sound was staying just out of sight, hidden by the thick trees and hanging moss. "We need to find the others," I said. "Are you crazy? We need to get out of here and call for help." "With what? The radio doesn't work. And by the time we get back to town and bring help, it'll be dark." Luke looked at the sky. The sun was already getting low. In the swamp, dark came fast and stayed long. "1 more hour," he said. "Then we leave, with or without the others." I agreed, but I had a feeling that whatever was in the water wasn't going to let us leave that easy. As we got back in the boat, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The water level had risen. The markers I'd been using to navigate were now several feet underwater. In the few hours we'd been searching, the water had risen at least 4 feet. "How is that possible?" Luke asked. "There's no rain, no storm. Where's all this water coming from?" I didn't have an answer. But I was starting to understand that normal rules didn't apply in this part of the swamp. Something was changing the water, controlling it, and it didn't want us to leave. We found Dr. Hayes floating face down in a quiet backwater about a mile from where we'd discovered Mark. At first, I thought she was dead. Her body was perfectly still, arms spread wide, long black hair floating around her head like seaweed. "Jenny!" Luke shouted, jumping into the water before I could stop him. He pulled her to the boat, and I helped him get her inside. She was alive, but something was very wrong. Her skin was ice cold, and her lips were blue. She looked like she'd been in freezing water for hours. "Jenny, can you hear me?" Luke asked. Her eyes opened, but they were different. The pupils were huge, like she was looking at something far away. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "It's down there," she said. "It's been down there for so long." "What's down there?" I asked. "The thing that lives in the deep places, the thing that remembers when the water was young." Luke and I looked at each other. Jenny was a smart woman, a scientist. She didn't talk about things that lived in deep places. "How long have you been in the water?" Luke asked. 3 days, maybe 4. It's hard to tell time down there." "Down where?" "In the deep place, where the bones are." I felt my skin crawl. "What bones?" "All of them. Animals, people, things that came to the water and never left." Jenny closed her eyes and started shivering. I wrapped her in a blanket, but she didn't seem to get any warmer. Her skin stayed cold as ice. "We need to get her to a hospital," Luke said. "The nearest hospital is 2 hours away. She might not make it." "Then what do you want to do?" Before I could answer, Jenny grabbed my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Don't go back to the deep water," she whispered. "It knows you're here now. It's been waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For someone who understands the water. Someone who can take its place." I didn't like the sound of that. "Take its place doing what?" "Guarding the deep places. Keeping the old things asleep." Luke was checking Jenny's pulse and temperature. "Sam, this doesn't make sense. Her body temperature is about 10 degrees too low. She should be dead." "But I'm not dead," Jenny said, opening her eyes again. "It won't let me die. Not yet." "What won't let you die?" "The Guardian. The thing that lives between the water and the earth. It's older than the trees, older than the land. It remembers when everything was Otter." I was about to ask her more questions when the boat rocked hard. Something had bumped us from below, just like before. But this time, the bump was followed by a sound that made my blood freeze. A voice, deep and bubbling, like someone talking with their mouth full of water. But it wasn't speaking English. It was making sounds I'd never heard before. Sounds that seemed to come from the water itself. "It's calling," Jenny whispered. "It wants to talk to you." "To me? Why me?" "Because you know the water. Because you've saved people from drowning. It thinks you'll understand." The boat rocked again, harder this time. I looked over the side and saw something that made my heart stop. Eyes. 2 huge eyes, glowing green in the dark water, staring right at me. "Luke," I said quietly, "start the motor." "I'm trying. It won't start." The eyes rose higher in the water. I could see the outline of a head now, massive and covered in dark hair. The thing was at least 8 feet tall, and it was still mostly underwater. "It's coming up," Jenny said. "It wants to meet you." "I don't want to meet it. You don't have a choice. It's been alone for so long." The creature rose higher, and I got my first good look at it. It had the shape of a man, but everything was wrong. Its arms were too long, its chest too wide. Hair covered its entire body, thick and dark as swamp moss. And its face was almost human, but the eyes were too big, the mouth too wide. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere at once, from the water, from the trees, from the air itself. "Keeper of the waters," it said. And somehow I understood, even though the words were like nothing I'd ever heard. "You have walked on water and pulled the drowning from the deep. You know the secrets of the wet places." "I don't know any secrets," I said. "You know where the deep channels run. You know where the air is cold and where it is warm. You know the places where the earth is soft and the places where it is hard." That was true. After 20 years in the swamp, I did know all those things. What do you want? I asked. To show you the deep places, to share the old knowledge, to make you understand what lives beneath. I don't want to understand. The creature's eyes grew brighter. Your friend is dying. The woman scientist grows cold. Only the deep places can save her now. I looked at Jenny. She was shivering worse than ever, and her lips were turning purple. What did you do to her? I demanded. I showed her the deep places, but she is not a keeper of waters. She cannot survive the cold depths. She needs the warm places, the shallow places. Then help her. I cannot, but you can. Come with me to the deep places. Learn what I have to teach, and I will warm the cold water for your friend. Luke had been quiet during this whole conversation, but now he spoke up. Don't trust it, Sam. It's not human. It doesn't think like us. The creature turned its massive head toward Luke. The small scientist speaks truth. I am not human. I am older than humans, older than the land. I remember when the great waters covered everything. Then why do you want to help Jenny? I asked. Because she has seen the bone places. She knows the truth now. She will never be the same. Jenny lifted her head and looked at me with those strange, distant eyes. He's right, Sam. I saw things down there, old things, things that should stay buried. What kind of things? The bones aren't just from animals. They're from people, lots of people, and they're not old bones. Some of them are fresh. My blood went cold. How fresh? Days, weeks. The creature has been feeding. The thing in the water made a sound like laughter, but it was horrible, like water bubbling up from a deep well. I do not feed on the warm-blooded, it said, but I collect, I gather. I keep the secrets of the deep places safe. Safe from what? From those who would wake the sleeping things, from those who woo. Drain the deep places dry. I was starting to understand. This creature wasn't just a monster, it was a guardian protecting something even worse than itself. What's down there? I asked. What are you guarding? The creature's eyes grew dim. Things that should not be named. Things that slept when the world was young and should sleep until the world is old. And if someone wakes them? Then the deep places will rise, and the dry places will drown, and the old hunger will walk the earth again. Jenny was getting worse. Her breathing was shallow, and her skin was turning blue. Luke was doing everything he could to keep her warm, but nothing was working. I need to get her to a hospital, I said. The hospital cannot help her now. She has been too long in the cold deep. Only the warm shallows can save her. Then create some warm shallows. I cannot, but you can. Learn the deep water ways. Become a keeper of the wet places, and I will teach you how to warm the cold and cool the warm. I looked at Jenny, dying in the bottom of my boat. I looked at Luke, scared and trying to be brave. And I made a decision that would change everything. Okay, I said. Show me. The creature reached out one massive hairy arm and touched the side of our boat. The moment its skin made contact with the metal, everything changed. The water around us began to move, not flowing like a river, but moving like it was alive. It rose up in impossible spirals, creating walls of water that shouldn't have been able to stand. The boat was lifted higher and higher until we were floating 20 feet above the swamp. Do not be afraid, the creature said. I am showing you the truth of the deep places. Through the walls of water, I could see down into the swamp like I was looking through glass. And what I saw made my stomach turn. The bottom wasn't mud and plants like I'd always thought. It was overed in bones. Thousands and thousands of bones, stretching as far as I could see. How long have you been here? I whispered. Since the beginning. Since the first waters covered the first lands. I have been guardian and keeper, collector and protector. Protector of what? The creature pointed down, deeper than I'd ever imagined the swamp could go. Far below the bones, in a darkness so complete it seemed solid, something moved, something huge. The old hunger, the creature said. The thing that ate the world before the world learned to fight back. As I watched, the massive shape in the deep darkness shifted. Just that small movement sent ripples through the water that made our boat rock. It's still alive, I breathed. It sleeps. It has slept for 10,000 years. But it grows restless. The warm-blooded multiply above. They build their cities and drain their waters. The old hunger feels the changes. It begins to wake. And you keep it asleep? I keep it fed. The bones you see are offerings. The lost, the foolish, the ones who venture too deep. They feed the old hunger in small tastes, keeping it satisfied so it does not wake fully. I felt sick. You've been killing people. I have been saving the world. Each small death prevents the great death. Each sacrifice keeps the old hunger dreaming. Jenny stirred in the bottom of the boat. Her eyes opened, and she looked up at the walls of water surrounding us. It's beautiful, she whispered, and terrible. The woman scientist understands, the creature said. She has seen the truth. She knows why the deep places must be guarded. I won't do it, I said. I won't kill people to keep that thing asleep. Then it will wake, and when it wakes, it will be hungry. It will eat the shallow places first, then the dry places. It will grow with each feeding until nothing remains but the deep, dark water. Luke had been silent, but now he spoke up. There has to be another way. There is no other way. There has never been another way. The old hunger must be fed, or it will feed itself. That's when I remembered something. My grandfather had been part Caddo Indian, and he'd told me stories about the swamp spirits. He'd said they could be fought with fire. That fire was the one thing they feared. What about fire? I asked. The creature's eyes went wide. Fire is the enemy of the deep places. Fire boils water and burns the wet earth dry. Would fire hurt the old hunger? Fire would. The creature paused. Fire would wake it. Fire would make it angry. Fire would make it rise. Or fire would kill it. No, fire would only make it stronger. The old hunger feeds on heat as well as flesh. Fire would be like a feast. I felt my hope dying. If fire wouldn't work, what would? That's when Jenny spoke up. Cold, she said. Not fire. Cold. What? The creature keeps the water cold because cold makes things sleep. The old hunger is sleeping because it's cold. If we could make it colder, it would sleep deeper, I finished. The creature was shaking its massive head. The cold places are my domain. I control the temperature of the deep waters. I cannot make them colder without making myself weaker. Then we don't need you to do it, Luke said suddenly. We need something else. Like what? Luke looked at me with excitement in his eyes. Like the deepest, coldest water in the world. Like the water from the bottom of the ocean. I didn't understand at first. Then it hit me. The diving equipment. Jenny's team had deep-sea diving gear. Right. Equipment designed to work in water so cold and deep it would kill a normal person. The creature was watching us with those huge green eyes. What are you planning? We're going to freeze your old hunger so deep it never wakes up, I said. The creature made that horrible bubbling laugh sound. You cannot reach the deep places. You are warm-blooded. You would die in the cold darkness. Maybe, but I've got to try. Jenny grabbed at my arm. Sam, you can't. I barely survived a few hours down there. You'll freeze to death. Then I freeze to death. But I'm not going to spend the rest of my life feeding people to a monster. The creature's eyes grew bright with anger. You would risk waking the old hunger? You would risk the end of the world? I'm going to end it myself. That's when the creature attacked. It moved faster than anything that size should be able to move. One moment it was in the water below us. The next it was reaching up with arms as long as telephone poles. It grabbed our boat and pulled us down into the swamp. We hit the water hard. The boat flipped, throwing all of us into the cold, dark depths. I went under. and the first thing I felt was the incredible cold. It was like being dunked in liquid ice. I came up gasping, looking around for the others. Luke was treading water about 10 feet away, but he was already turning blue. Jenny was floating face down again, unconscious. The creature rose up out of the water in front of me, more massive than ever. This close, I could see that its skin wasn't just hairy. It was covered in scales and moss and things that looked like tiny fish. "You will not wake the old hunger," it said. "You will join the bones in the deep places." It reached for me with one of those massive hands. I tried to swim away, but the water was too cold. My muscles weren't working right. Then I remembered the emergency flare in my pocket. I pulled it out and yanked the cord. The flare burst into brilliant red light, and the creature screamed. It was a sound like nothing I'd ever heard, like the earth itself was in pain. The creature's hand stopped inches from my face. Where the flare light touched its skin, the scales were burning away. "Fire," it whispered. "The enemy of the deep places." "That's right," I said. "And I've got more where this came from." I swam toward the overturned boat where our emergency supplies were floating. The creature tried to follow, but the flare light kept it back. I managed to grab another flare and a waterproof container of boat fuel. "Luke," I shouted, "get Jenny and swim for shore." "What about you?" "I'm going to finish this." The creature was circling me now, staying just outside the range of the flare light. "You cannot win, Keeper of Waters. The fire will die, and the cold will remain." "Maybe, but I'm going to try." I opened the container of boat fuel and poured it on the water around me. The fuel spread out in a thin layer, rainbow-colored in the flare light. "You will kill yourself," the creature said. "Probably, but I'll kill you first." I touched the flare to the fuel. The water exploded into flame. The creature screamed again, but this time it was different. This time it sounded afraid. The fire spread across the surface of the swamp, creating a wall of flame between me and the creature. But the fuel was burning fast, and I knew I only had a few seconds. I took a deep breath and dove as deep as I could go. The water was so cold it felt like knives cutting my skin, but I could see the deep places now, lit by the fire above. And at the very bottom, in the deepest darkness, I could see the old hunger. It was huge beyond description. Bigger than a house, bigger than a building. It looked like a cross between a fish and a snake, with hundreds of eyes and a mouth that could swallow a school bus. And it was starting to wake up. The eyes were opening, one by one. The massive body was starting to move. The fire above was warming the water, and the old hunger was rising from its sleep. I had one chance. One shot to end this before it was too late. I still had the second flare in my hand. I pulled the cord and watched it burst into light. Then I swam straight down, toward the waking monster. The old hunger saw me coming. Its mouth opened, showing teeth like broken glass, but I wasn't trying to escape. I was trying to get inside. I swam straight into that massive mouth, still high-chase, holding the burning flare. The creature's throat was like a tunnel leading down into its body. I could feel its heartbeat, slow and strong, shaking the water around me. And then I found what I was looking for. The creature's heart was the size of a car, beating once every few seconds. It was what kept the old hunger alive, what let it sleep and dream and wait for the world to end. I pressed the flare against the heart and felt it burn through the skin. The old hunger screamed. The sound was so loud it shook the entire swamp. Water erupted everywhere, and I was thrown up and out of the creature's mouth like a cork from a bottle. I broke the surface, gasping, just in time to see the old hunger die. Its massive body rose up out of the deepest water, thrashing and screaming. Then it went still. The huge eyes closed, one by one. The body sank back down into the depths, and the guardian creature was gone. I woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later. The doctors said I'd been found floating in the swamp, unconscious from hypothermia and exhaustion. Luke had pulled me out of the water and gotten me to help. Jenny was in the next bed. She was awake, but different. The cold was gone from her skin, and her eyes were normal again. But she was quiet, like she was listening to something no one else could hear. The deep places are still there, she told me, but they're different now. Warmer. The old cold is gone. Luke came to visit every day. He told me that the official report said we'd been in a boating accident. 3 people dead, 2 survivors. The bodies of the research team were never found. What really happened down there? He asked me one day. I told him everything. He listened without saying a word, and when I was done, he was quiet for a long time. Do you believe me? I asked. I believe something happened. Something that can't be explained. But the creature is gone now, right? And the thing in the deep water? I think so, I hope so. But I wasn't sure. Even now, 2 years later, I'm not sure. I retired from the Park Service 6 months after the incident, and I couldn't go back to the swamp. Every time I got near deep water, I heard things, voices calling from below, splashing that didn't match any animal I knew. My son Jake decided not to become a ranger. He said he wanted to work with computers instead, stay away from the outdoors. I didn't argue with him. The area around Boggy Creek is closed now. The official reason is environmental protection, but I know the real reason. Other rangers have reported strange things, equipment failures, sounds from the deep water, sightings of things that shouldn't exist. Sometimes I wonder if I really killed the old hunger, or if I just put it back to sleep. Sometimes I wonder if there are other guardians in other swamps, other deep places that need protecting. But mostly, I try not to think about it. I live in the city now, in a small apartment with no water view. I don't go swimming, I don't go boating. I don't even like to take baths. Because late at night, when the city is quiet, I can still hear the deep places calling, and I'm afraid that someday I might answer. Jenny calls me sometimes. She's working at a university now, studying something called aquatic mythology. She says she's trying to understand what happened to us, trying to find other cases like ours. There are more, she told me last time we talked. Other deep places, other guardians. The one we met wasn't the only one. How many more? I don't know, but I think they're all connected. I think they're all part of something bigger. I asked her to stop calling after that. I don't want to know about the bigger thing. I don't want to know about other deep places. But I can't stop thinking about what the creature told me, about being a keeper of waters, about understanding the secrets of the wet places. Because the truth is, I do understand. I understand more than I want to. I can feel the deep places calling to me, even here in the city. I can sense where the water is cold and where it's warm, where the earth is soft and where it's hard. And sometimes, in my dreams, I go back to the swamp. In my dreams, I dive down to the deepest places and find the creature waiting for me. It's not dead. It's not gone. It's just waiting. The old hunger is gone, it tells me in my dreams. But new hungers are always being born. The deep places still need a guardian. I always wake up from these dreams with the taste of swamp water in my mouth. My name is Samuel Washington. I used to be a park ranger. I used to think I knew all the secrets of the Arkansas swamps. Now I know there are